Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Scion Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Had Fate Master Quirk. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Not all men are created equal. This is how these kinds of stories begin. Every single human being has been created in a different way, with different capabilities, strengths, weaknesses, and so on. Some of them do nothing with their abilities. Most of them, even, just move through life, going through the motions without ever leaving as much as a scratch from which they may be remembered. However, some men, some women, some creatures, end up leaving a powerful mark on the world. A mark so strong that the universe itself, the collective human consciousness, refuses to ever forget them. This is the story of one such man, of the power he unwittingly gained, and of the changes he brought to the world with it. But it won't do to start so far ahead, so let's take a couple of steps back, all the way to one fateful morning. Midoriya Izuku, age 5 and 2 months, he'd bellow whenever someone asked, a massive grin on his face, woke up with a soft yelp. This, in and of itself, was not an irregular occurrence by any means, as most children tend to be. He was a bit clumsy, and so it wasn't unusual for Izuku to fall off his bed after being tangled in his sheets, or to stub his toe as he was getting up. No, the yelp in and of itself wasn't the unusual part. The unusual part, in fact, was the source of that yelp, as Izuku woke up, on that surprising morning, with a strange tingling sensation on the back of his left hand, similar yet different to when you've slept on it wrong. And, as the young boy went to look at his hand, still laying in bed, a yelp came out of his mouth when he noticed 3 weird symbols on his hand, intersecting to form a strange tapestry, vaguely resembling a pair of wings with a head in their middle. What was even stranger was their color. Unlike what could have been considered a regular tattoo, Izuku's peculiar symbol sported a deep red hue. Izuku got lost in that sight, staring at it with his fullest attention, as if trying to extract the knowledge out of the symbols, but to no avail, until his bedroom's door was opened, leading to a small series of events. First of all, Izuku's mother, one Midoriya Izuku, entered the room, wondering why her son, who was usually a ball of energy, had yet to get up. Secondly, Izuku screamed, as she noticed something that Izuku yet hadn't. Thirdly, Izuku himself noticed what had caused such a powerful reaction in his mother, and joined her scream. Of course, their reaction was perfectly rational. After all, most humans tend to react in such a way when an unknown person is found standing guard next to someone's bed. This person, however, was seemingly unfazed by their reaction. He stood, unwavering and with a blank, if vaguely irritated expression, next to Izuku's bed, his green cloak wrapped around him in such a way that it was hard to notice any details about him. What little could be seen was his stern, sharp face, his deep amber eyes, and a green hat, in the same hue as his cloak, which mostly covered his white hair. Midoriya Izuku was, naturally, the first one to recover her composure. Who are you? What are you doing in my baby's room? The man's piercing gaze turned to her, his expression entirely unchanged. I am to be your son's guide and servant, as the universe decided when it gave him those markings. Izuku's eyes twinkled with curiosity at the word servant, which was said with such a weight that Izuku couldn't help but wonder about it. What's your name, mister? Izuku chirped, now sitting on his bed to better stare at the stranger, who had turned to look at the child with a vaguely softer expression. You may call me Avenger, young master. By virtue of those spells, the newly named Avenger gently grabbed Izuku's left hand, pointing at the red markings on its back. The universe has tied us together as master and servant, and I will do whatever I must to ensure your survival, and that your wish, whatever it may be, is granted. Izuku's eyes shone once more, this time with boundless joy, and a couple of tears, as he turned towards his mom. I can be a hero, Mom. This, he didn't move his hand from Avenger's grasp, just barely twitching it, must be my quirk. The quirk analyst and counselor, Dr. Hinamura, hummed curiously as she first examined what Avenger had called command spells, and then Avenger himself. Well, this is certainly an unusual quirk, Midoriya-san, Midoriya-kun. It would appear to be some kind of emitter-type quirk which allows you to create these. She gestured towards Avenger, who was still standing behind Izuku, much like an extremely tense guard dog. Quirk creatures? I guess that's the only name we have. Izuku hummed, slightly worried, as Izuku interjected. Ah, Avenger-san called himself a servant, Hinamura-san? She nodded, scribbling something on her notebook. I see. Is it safe to assume that Avenger-san is an entirely independent entity from you, Midoriya-kun? Izuku turned towards Avenger, a questioning look in his eyes that made the servant sigh. Yes, doctor, you can say that. Master and I are entirely separate beings, with our only tie being the command spells he can use to give me complex orders. Also, he waited for her to finish writing before continuing. If you need a name for us, I believe that the consensus between the others is heroic spirits. This last sentence set off a round of curious, and, on Inko's part, slightly anxious, questions. Others? Spirits? Heroic? Avenger sighed once more, looking away from the crowd. Indeed. I don't exactly have all the information myself, as you can certainly understand, but from what I do know, I believe that the consensus has been reached because of us all, in one way or another, leaving a permanent mark on human history. The world itself, then, enshrined us all in humanity's memory, and thus we came to be known as that. Dr. Hinamura kept writing throughout Avenger's explanation, careful not to lose any details that might endanger her patient. From your explanation, can I assume that there are others who may call upon you, then? Avenger shook his head. Once, maybe, but as of right now, I believe that none of the others have been summoned for a couple of centuries or so. However, he continued, moving one of his hands out of his cloak to gently place it on Izuku's head, making him giggle and lean into the touch. Now that the channel has been opened, I assume that others may come through, although I'll do my best to always be the one at Master's side. So we will need to keep an eye out for any other potential heroic spirits manifesting at Midoriya-kun's side, okay? Now, Dr. Hinamura continued, handing a form over to Inko, I believe I have most of the relevant information to send to the Quirk registry. All that we still need is a name for this power. Inko turned to look at her son, who just shrugged, just as confused as the rest of the human adults in the room. Do you have any ideas? Izuku questioned, turning towards his servant, Avenger-san? Avenger hummed, his expression just as stern, but vaguely thoughtful. From what little I can recall of my previous summonings, I believe that the old instances used what was called a Holy Grail War to summon heroic spirits to the world. It was a weird ritual, in which 7 masters fought between themselves for the chance to get one wish granted by this artifact, the Holy Grail, which was both the wish granter and the main source of magical energy through which servants were summoned. Avenger moved one hand to gently grab his chin, as if deep in thought, almost as if we were answering its call. Thus I believe that Holy Grail might be an appropriate name for your connection with us, Master. Izuku turned towards Dr. Hinamura and Inko and, after seeing no other ideas, nodded at Avenger's suggestion. Holy Grail it is, then. Hey, Avenger-san. Izuku was scribbling on a notebook while sitting at his desk, as Avenger sat next to him on the ground, skimming some book he'd gotten from Inko's library. Yes, Master? Izuku's face crunched up in a weird way at the repeated use of the word Master. Can't you just call me by my name? Anyways, he put down his pen, turning towards his servant with a curious expression on his face. I'm going back to school tomorrow, and I was thinking, how are you gonna be near me? Avenger gently placed down the book, angling his head in such a way that he could look at Izuku while answering his questions. If that's what you wish me to do, Midoriya-kun, I will address you by name more often. As for your second question, he continued, taking off his hat to run a hand through his fluffy hair, we servants don't actually need to always be in a physical form, so I will follow you in what we call spirit form. I'll be there to protect you from any harm, although you might not be able to physically see me. Izuku nodded, a bit confused but understanding enough. And, can I ask you some more stuff? Avenger's expression softened as he turned around, fully facing his master. Of course, my accomplice. And you can trust that I'll answer your queries to the best of my abilities. A beat of silence passed, before Izuku turned to his desk and grabbed his notebook, reopening it to where his childish scribbles covered the page in questions. Well, what are the command spells for? How do they work? Avenger hummed, closing his eyes for a moment while thinking. They're a physical symbol of our bond, as I said to Hinamura-san, but you're right in that they have more uses. For now you don't need to worry yourself with the combat implications for them, he continued, stretching in a slightly more comfortable position by leaning back on his hands, but you can use them, I believe, to test our connection and know of my physical status. You may also use them to impart specific, powerful orders unto me, but as I said, those are combat implications, which we will consider when you're a bit older. Izuku drank in all the information, scribbling it down onto his notebook. If I use them all, will you disappear? Avenger shook his head. Not at all. They will slowly replenish with time, although I can't say that I know how long it'll take you to replenish them. What about the other heroic spirits? Can you tell me something about them? Avenger hummed thoughtfully, thinking about it. I don't think so, Midoriya-kun. What I can suggest, however, is that you take some time to inform yourself about important historical figures, elements from mythology and legends, and the such. I'm sure that will help you greatly when you do meet some of the others. The following day, true to his word, Izuku could faintly feel Avenger's presence at the edge of his vision, although he knew that, for everyone else, the strange man was invisible. During recess, however, he was extremely excited to finally show his quirk off to Kaken. They were supposed to become heroes together, after all, and beforehand there was a bit of doubt, what with his quirk not having yet come in, but no longer. Kaken. Kaken, also known by his full name as Bakugo Katsuki, fixed his red eyes on Izuku as soon as the child called him, a big smile on his face. Izuku, how are you feeling? Were you sick or something? Izuku smiled, shaking his head. I'm fine. I didn't have anything, I just went to the quirk counselor to register my quirk. Kaken's smile got even bigger. Tell me about it. Izuku nodded, shoving his left hand towards his friend to show him the markings. We're calling it Holy Grail. It lets me summon ancient heroes and important people from all of history to fight at my side. And I can give them order with these, they're called command spells, although I'm not yet sure of what I can do with them. Kaken's expression soured slightly, and he pet his head to the side, still curious but a bit disappointed. So you can't fight on your own with it, then? Izuku shrugged. I dunno. I think I can still fight with it. The counselor said it might do more stuff and we just don't know it yet because I'm too small for it. Kaken shrugged back, looking up from the strange markings to Izuku's face, a full-on smirk on his face. So, what about these heroes? Show me one of them. Izuku took a peek around, just to make sure that they weren't being watched too attentively and, when he was satisfied that no one seemed to be paying them any attention, he quietly called out. Show yourself, Avenger-san. No sooner had Izuku said the words, that the space on his left was suddenly filled by the cloaked man Izuku was slowly growing accustomed to. Avenger's clothes billowed in the soft breeze, showing a strange, greenish suit with equally green dress shoes, before the man bowed dramatically. Good afternoon, Master's friend. You, too, may call me Avenger. I am Midoriya Izuku's sworn servant. Kaken eyed the strange man cautiously, slowly walking around him to properly take in what he looked like. So you're his summoned hero, huh? You don't look like much. He paused, almost as if taking a moment to ponder his words, before nodding. I bet I could take a weakling like you. A wicked smile spread itself on Avenger's lips, as his eyes took on a slightly crazed look. Oh ho ho, you think you could challenge me, an anti-hero who left his mark on humanity? That takes guts, kid. Kaken's face emulated Avenger's, as an equally crazed look took him over. You think so, you overgrown peacock? Then try me. Izuku's face grew more and more worried, as neither of his friends seemed willing to back down, before deciding that he had to be the one to stop this situation, not that he was worried for Avenger, of course. While Kaken's quirk was stronger, he was still a child, and Izuku heavily suspected that Avenger wouldn't have much trouble obliterating Kaken with barely a fingertip. Stop it, both of you. We can't fight at school, Avenger-san. Avenger's gaze settled on Izuku's face, immediately returning to a stern expression as he stood straighter, his cloak once again enveloping him entirely. My apologies, Master. If you do not have further need of me, I will take my leave once again. Kaken still looked like he was raring for a fight, but seeing Avenger back down had taken a bit of the fight out of him, replacing it with something he couldn't yet name. Yes, thank you, Avenger-san. I'll see you back home? Avenger nodded, before returning to his spirit form. Kaken's face, however, hadn't calmed down. If anything, it looked like he'd been slowly spiraling further and further into his anger, before turning towards Izuku. What was that, Izuku? Do you think I'm too weak to fight your stupid quirk puppet? Izuku stumbled back, taken by surprise by Kaken's sudden reaction. And no, Kaken, I just dash. You just thought I was such a pathetic weakling, huh? Well, what could you even do? You're useless without your puppet, you can't even fight on your own, you Deku. Izuku's face grew red with tension, as he felt something along the edge of his command spells. Avenger wanted to come back out of his spirit form to teach this random brat who thought he was better than his master a thing or two. Izuku knew what would happen, should Avenger get out. And no, Kaken. I would never dash. The shove came before Izuku could react, and all of a sudden the world tumbled around him, leaving him flat on his back, with Kaken rapidly approaching. He could try to dodge. No, Kaken was too fast for that. Maybe he could strike back? With what muscles, though? What if? Put me down, you a-hole. Izuku blinked back the faint dots that were covering his vision, taking in a deep breath as he realized he hadn't been breathing properly, as he saw Avenger holding Kaken up by the scruff of his shirt. No. You're not allowed to hurt my master. Avenger-san, don't hurt him. Avenger turned his stern gaze back on Izuku, who just now noticed the raging hellfire that was hidden behind that stern face. If that is your command, Midoriya-kun, I shan't hurt him. Izuku nodded, his head quickly going up and down in his anxiety to keep Kaken safe from harm. Avenger, after taking another look at Izuku, turned Kaken around to look at him. I'll put you down, and you won't hurt my master. Is that clear? Kaken was still throwing punches haphazardly, barely listening to what had been happening around him, when Avenger spoke to him again. Did you hear me, brat? I said that I'll put you down. You, fight me fairly, you bstrd. Avenger sighed. Fine. Izuku didn't have the time to react. As soon as Kaken had been released, he threw himself bodily at Avenger, and in a blur of movement, Kaken was flat on his butt, in much the same position as the one he'd shoved Izuku in. You will not attack Midoriya-kun. Did I make myself clear? The silence was oppressive, and Izuku noticed something he hadn't before. A faint, dark light seemed to be surrounding Avenger's feet. Avenger-san? The man turned slightly, eyeing Izuku before turning fully to lift him to a standing position. There you go, master. Are you all right? Izuku nodded, anxiety and a tinge of fear filling his expression. Good. Go along, then. I believe it's almost time for you to be back in class. A frown etched itself on Izuku's face. What about you? Avenger smiled. Don't worry about me. I'll be right behind you. Izuku chewed the inside of his cheek anxiously for a moment, considering his options, before nodding, and turning around. When he next saw Kaken, he looked furious, but he was unharmed. You should tell your mother about the treatment you received at school, Midoriya-kun. Izuku frowned, his eyes moving away from the notebook on which he was scribbling some notes about Endeavor's quirk, as much as a 5-year-old child could write, that is, and onto Avenger, who was once again sitting at Izuku's side, quietly reading something on the newspaper. Why? She'd only worry, and it's not like he hurt me or anything. Indeed. Yet, Avenger answered, turning a page, you don't deserve to be treated like that, no matter what misguided reasons that child might have for his behavior. A sigh came out of Izuku's mouth, before he shook his head. No, thank you, Avenger-san. It's not that big of a deal, anyways. Avenger was the one who frowned, now. His eyes didn't move from the newspaper, but Izuku could feel the disappointment that the man was radiating even without having to properly look in his eyes. Very well, master, if that's your opinion, I won't push it further. However, he continued, closing the newspaper and turning to look at Izuku, do know that, should he try something else, I will intervene. Izuku swallowed, vaguely feeling like he'd just heard someone actively threatening Kaken's life. Please don't hurt him? Avenger smiled, something sharp and dangerous that followed that same crazed look from earlier in the morning. I'll see what I can do. Slowly, Izuku started to settle in his new routine of waking up with his servant friend, Avenger, keeping watch over him. He still screamed the first couple of weeks, however. It steadily became a habit, in a way. He'd wake up, say good morning to his heroic spirit, who'd then head towards the kitchen to inform Inko that Izuku was up, while Izuku himself washed up and got dressed. Then, Avenger would accompany Izuku to school, and that was another thing to get used to, although it was more of Inko's issue there. It took her a while, but after seeing how quickly Avenger had reacted when Izuku was about to fall from a tree, she relaxed enough to allow him to accompany her child, and follow him around in spirit form during the day. He'd then accompany his young master back home, and spend time helping him with homework, as well as teaching him anything Izuku wanted to learn, together with some primers on other languages. Sure, the servants would all speak Japanese, but it wouldn't hurt for Izuku to also know some other languages, just in case. The routine went on for a while, until it got changed. Izuku woke up, slowly stretching out before opening his eyes. Good morning, Avon? However, when he went to say his usual good morning to his servant, a new face greeted him. This face, distinctly softer than Avenger's, belonged to a kind-looking man, whose skin was darker, contrasting with his incredibly pale, almost to the point of whiteness, hair, which fell in a long braid behind him. This man wore strange robes, in crimson and beige, and 10 golden rings adorned his fingers. You're not Avenger-san. The man smiled, clearly a bit embarrassed. Ah, that I'm not, I apologize. He bowed slightly, his eyes still fixated on Izuku's face, am Solomon, a caster-class servant. Avenger believes that, at this moment, it would be best if we worked on your mind, instead than your body, and thus we casters should be the best option, for this. Izuku mulled it over for a moment, curiosity and worry swirling in his head, before the latter one. Did I upset Avenger-san? Solomon shook his head, his kind smile still in place, as he headed forwards and sat on the edge of Izuku's bed. Not at all, master. He's still in here, he continued, gently tapping a finger against Izuku's forehead, protecting your mind from nightmares and any external intrusions. One of Izuku's eyebrows quirked upwards, confusion filling his gaze. Intrusions? Solomon nodded. Indeed. You see, back in. He paused, thoughtful. Well, not our time, but back when we were summoned semi-regularly, it wasn't uncommon for people to attack one another, or to suffer attacks, through their minds. Thus, Avenger specialized himself in protecting the minds of his masters, and he still sticks to that role today. Worries assuaged, at least for now, Izuku nodded, gently grabbing Solomon's hand to shake it. All right. My name is Midoriya Izuku, he introduced himself, a brilliant smile on his face. It's nice to meet you, Solomon-san. The caster's smile grew stronger at that, gently shaking his master's hand. The pleasure's mine, Midoriya-kun. Now, I believe it's time for breakfast. Izuku dashed out of his room as soon as the sentence was out of his servant's mouth. Solomon, Izuku would find out as time passed, was an incredibly smart person, even though he could occasionally be rather awkward. Still, Izuku was awkward too, at times, so he wouldn't be upset about any occasional slips of the tongue. He also found out that Solomon, too, was incredibly strong, when he lifted up the desk with one hand to pick up a pencil that had slipped his grasp. You're so strong, Solomon-san. The caster rubbed his neck bashfully, smiling softly. Ah, master, you flatter me. I'm actually much weaker than most other servants, most of my power lies in the magecraft God granted me. Still, in spite of those words, Izuku kept on admiring this other servant of his, even while the man showed himself to be a workaholic dork. As time passed, Izuku's schooling slowly shifted. At first, most of his learning happened outside the house, but after King Solomon manifested, a lot more of that learning started to be done under the Midoriya household's roof. Under Caster's tutelage, Izuku started to learn and understand more about history, architecture, quirk science, although, back in Solomon's time, and even a while later, that would have been called magecraft, and the tiniest smidge of ethics. You see, master, Solomon droned, one day, with an uncomfortable expression on his face, sometimes, in order to save everyone, you might be forced to look the other way from some minor evils. It's never a pleasant choice, and hopefully you'll never have to do that, but you might. Izuku frowned at that lesson, but still dutifully took notes. Thus, for almost 2 years, Izuku and Inko fell in a sort of routine, with Solomon. An Avenger occasionally swapping places and making sure to teach their young master as he kept growing. Izuku hit a couple of growth spurts, which helped him grow out of the beansprout nickname that Solomon had given him around his 6th birthday, but not by much. He was ahead of his schoolmates in a number of subjects, thanks to his private tutors, and while he was not the most appreciated person in class, socially speaking, he still had a couple of acquaintances he occasionally played or studied with. Shortly after his 7th birthday, however, something changed yet again. Izuku was walking back home alone. For once, Avenger hadn't manifested himself that day, and Solomon had only followed him to school before Izuku couldn't sense him anymore. He'd taken his usual way home, going for the usual shortcut through the underpass, when he noticed a black car at the end of the road, parked in such a way as to block the underpass exit entirely. Izuku turned his head slightly, checking out his surroundings, and noticed a second car following him and parking at the entrance of the underpass, blocking it. A surge of fear rushed through him when 2 men stepped out of the first car. They were both wearing a 3-piece black suit, with dark glasses hiding their eyes, and their black hair at an anonymous short length. Izuku swallowed, clenching tighter his left hand around his backpack strap. Young man, would you happen to be Midoriya Izuku? He flinched when the man on the left said his name. From this close, Izuku's anxiety-ridden mind focused on the fact that this man had a mole on his left cheek, while the other didn't. I am. Did you need something? The man patiently let him talk before nodding and grabbing one of his arms. You have to come with us, Midoriya-kun. Izuku instantly froze in fear. Something, deep in the young master's gut, screamed at him that following these men would not lead to anything good. That same thing was snarling and yelling, begging to be let out, to hurt these people who would try and abduct their master, and in a flash of light, a blade forced the men away from Izuku. Later that night, in his room, Izuku would recall a conversation he'd had with Solomon. You see, master, Solomon had said during one of their lessons, the name you gave your quirk is more than just a name. The Holy Grail wasn't only a vessel for wishes, back when quirks were called magecraft. What do you mean, Solomon-san? The king smiled, softly sitting against Izuku's desk. Well, the Grail's main purpose was, indeed, granting 2 wishes, to a pair of master and servant, but it also served as the main anchor through which servants manifested. You could almost say, he continued, drawing a diagram on some paper, that the call of the Grail, resonating with the master's wishes, allowed the manifestation of the servant through the master's will. And a will can be for many different purposes. The men had barely managed to get out of the young woman's blade. Her white hair was tied in a high ponytail, and her red eyes were glaring at those who had tried to take her master, her blade pointed towards them. She was wearing armor not dissimilar from that used by ancient samurai, although it only covered part of her right arm, instead of her whole body, on which she instead wore what Izuku could only describe as old traditional clothes, lacking better terms to explain it. The woman turned slightly towards her master. "Are you all right, Midoriya-kun?" Izuku, stunned, nodded, earning himself a soft smile from her. "Glad to hear that, and sorry for the delay. I'll handle the threats, you just stay safe, all right?" She didn't wait for an answer, and jumped forwards, rapidly closing the distance that kept her away from the men. Izuku felt a strange sensation. It was as if something had been drained out of him, and then a slight tingling sensation on his left hand. The woman inhaled deeply as she got close enough, grabbing both of the men. "Shukanen Bosatsu," Izuku barely heard her mutter, "give me power." In one fluid motion, the woman had thrown both of Izuku's assailants up in the air, and immediately grabbed a bow, ping an arrow. The brilliance of the morning sun. As she spoke, the arrow lit up with flames brighter than the sun itself, and Izuku could feel a strange sort of power radiating from her. On Ararikia Sawaka. As soon as the sentence had left her mouth, her arrow was shot, faster than lightning, and it exploded in bright light as soon as it was close enough to the two men. Izuku might have been worried about accidentally killing someone, but something inside of him told him that the arrow was just a rather powerful flashbang, and that it shouldn't have killed the two men. He'd barely finished that thought when the first two assailants dropped on their car, groaning in pain, but still clearly alive, and the woman, no, his third servant, twirled around, jumping past him and towards the car that had parked behind him. Another couple of assailants had emerged, one who had some vague wolf-like traits, while the other had her hand pointed forwards, as if trying to shoot something. Neither of them could react quickly enough, as the servant landed in front of them and, with two swift chops, they dropped unconscious. Izuku was vaguely nauseous, slightly scared, and also giddy at her display of power, when she approached him again. "Are you all right, master? They didn't hurt you, did they?" Izuku nodded, still at a loss for words, while the woman gave him a once-over and, satisfied, hoisted him on her shoulders. "Good," she sighed in relief. "I was worried I was too late, when I manifested." Finally, Izuku found his voice again. Thank you for saving me, but," he stuttered, a bit embarrassed at being given a piggyback ride, I don't think I know your name." She chuckled, slightly tightening her grip on his legs. Sorry. The battle took away my manners. She looked up, meeting his gaze with a soft smile, "am an archer-class servant. My true name is Tomo, although some people have called me Tomo Guzan. While you might not be Lord Yashinaka, I will still gladly be your loyal servant, Midoriya-kun." The following day, Izuku woke up to an extremely upset Avenger stalking his room. A kidnapping attempt in broad daylight. "I can't believe this. Who would be Dash?" "Good morning," Izuku mumbled, still half asleep, "Avenger-san." The man snapped towards Izuku, his eyes burning with intense rage before softening into the usual stern face. "Good morning, Midoriya-kun. I trust that Tomo protected you accurately." Izuku yawned, sitting up and moving to get out of bed before nodding at Avenger's question. "Good. I wish I could have done something myself, but I was needed to counteract the mental power that was being used on you." Another yawn came out of Izuku's mouth, before he finally became aware enough to realize what Avenger had said. "Mental power?" Avenger nodded, offering Izuku a hand and lifting him to his feet. "Indeed. One of your would-be kidnappers had a power that would have made you drowsy, and thus easier to abduct." Izuku frowned. "So you?" As the only Avenger available, the man continued, slowly walking Izuku towards the kitchen, "am stuck on protecting your mental defenses. It would also be a good idea to try and strengthen your physical body, even if you're still so tiny." This earned him an offended huff from Izuku. "I'm 7 years old, Avenger-san. I'm not tiny." Avenger just looked at him, silently pointing out that, at Izuku's current height, he barely passed his servant's hip, and Izuku stuck his tongue out at him, earning himself a chuckle. All right. I'll try and arrange something so that you can start training, master." Midoriya Inko was worried. Her son's power had saved him, of course it had. Her baby had an array of powerful heroes from ancient history who were willing and ready to risk life and limb to keep him safe, so she wasn't worried about his power. No, what worried Inko was that someone had attempted to kidnap her baby, and that he was still with her only because of Izuku's quirk being more sentient than it should be. She'd already made a mental note to prepare some peach sweets for Guzan-san, should she manifest again, but not being able to do more was stressing her out. Maybe they should consider switching to homeschooling? No, Inko thought while she started cleaning up her kitchen. She didn't have the money to homeschool Izuku, and without her job, there was no way she could raise her son. Morning, Mom. Izuku barreled into the kitchen, still a ball of energy, with Avenger in tow, still pretending not to care and yet failing to do so in a proper way. Good morning, Izuku, Avenger-san. Here's your breakfast. She tried to put on a smile to wash away her tension, handing Izuku his plate, and there's some coffee, should you want it, Avenger-san. The man smiled at her, nodding once. Thank you, Midoriya-san. It's extremely appreciated. Izuku smiled brightly at his retainer, before looking at his hand and frowning. Hey, Avenger-san, the command spell reappeared. Does this mean that they recover once per day? It was now Avenger's turn to frown, turning to look at Izuku's hand. What do you mean, Master? Izuku shrugged. Yesterday Guzen-san did a big thing with a bow, where she threw 2 of the bad people and shot at them. It was so cool, and when she said her supermove's name it felt like a bit of something had been drained from me, and I had 1 less wing on my spell thingy. Avenger sighed, sitting down while clutching his mug. Ah. So Archer unleashed her true name to keep you safe, I see. That's not something that we should be doing. He paused to take a sip from his mug, sighing in relief at the taste, especially considering that you're still growing, and that we don't know how using that amount of energy might influence your growth. True name? Inko found herself asking, showing her son's usual brand of curiosity and earning herself an appraising look from Avenger. Yes, a true name. You have to remember that, when the Grail War was a thing, Avenger started to explain, gently tracing the edge of his mug with his left hand, the knowledge of a servant's name was power in the hands of an enemy master, so we usually were referred to by class name, that is, Archer, Avenger or Caster, for example. He paused, taking another sip of coffee as the other 2 started to digest his words. Thus, he continued, a servant would fight at a limited strength, but this way they'd be more of a wild card. However, in especially dire situations, a servant would use something that is commonly known as a noble weapon or noble phantasm. This is the identifying factor of a servant, which is why it's also known as revealing or unleashing one's true name. Our strength skyrockets, but now our enemy perfectly knows what we're capable of, as long as they're familiar with our history. A beat of silence followed Avenger's explanation, during which the Midoriya family took in his words and absorbed them. That's so cool. Izuku was the first one to break that silence, his exclamation attracting the attention of the 2 adults. That means that you guys are restraining yourselves unless your power is truly needed, like All Might does. Avenger turned towards Inko, raising an eyebrow questioningly. All Might? Izuku's eyes took a dangerous glint as he started rambling about his favorite hero, stopping his mother from explaining. After breakfast had been finished, Izuku found himself laying on the couch, taking advantage of the weekend to laze around a bit. Hey, Avenger-san. The man hummed to show that he was listening. Guzen-san's noble phantasm. She said something about Ararikia Sawaka. Can you maybe tell me more about her? Avenger shook his head. No, Master, I cannot. Not for lack of knowledge, mind. He elaborated, half turning to look at Izuku, but rather because I believe it might be rude of me to talk about her without her knowledge or permission. Oh, Izuku's face fell, so there's nothing you can tell me about her? Avenger's face took a thoughtful look as he pondered his master's question, before nodding. I can tell you that, to you, she's ancient history. Most of us servants are, to be fair, and she's not one of the oldest ones, but she's rather back in time. Late Heian PRD, which would be about 1,300 years back from now. Also, and here he turned fully, his gaze stuck on Izuku's face, she's had a rough life. Do what you can to make her feel welcome, whenever you see her. Izuku nodded, determination etched in every young line on his face. So, the Heian PRD? I don't think we've studied that. Avenger sighed, a disappointed expression on his face. Of course you haven't. Mankind doesn't change, and all we can do about it is attendre et espérer. Izuku ped his head sideways, confused. ATT. What? Avenger smiled, shaking his head. Ah, that's an old saying from my old motherland. It means wait and hope. A hum echoed from Izuku's throat as he pondered the sentence, almost unaware of Inko approaching them. Izuku? He snapped out of his thoughts, turning to look at his mother. Mom? Inko was nervously wringing her hands, clearly worried. After yesterday's incident, I talked with Guzen-san, she eyed Avenger, and Avenger-san. I wanted to talk to Solomon-san as well, but he hasn't appeared. She paused, taking in a deep breath. Anyways, we're thinking it might be for the best if you switched to a different kind of schooling, if you'd be willing? Izuku quietly chewed on that option. It's not like he had anything to anchor him to his current school, no friends, especially with how Bakugo treated him, and while the teachers didn't let him get bullied, they clearly didn't like him enough to properly punish his main bully. It might be a good idea. But where would I go? Well, I've done some research, Izuku snorted, which Inko ignored, and I found out that you could, hypothetically, attend some online school. There's one I found that covers all grades, from elementary to high school, so we could enroll you into that one until the end of your middle school, and then see what the situation's like and what you want to do. What do you say, Izuku? Izuku nodded, quickly reading his mother's notes on a couple of loose sheets of paper she'd handed him. He had to admit it, she'd clearly done a proper amount of research, especially for a crisis that was so sudden. That sounds great. Besides, he turned towards Avenger, smiling, this way we can more easily set up training for when I'll go to UA. Avenger nodded, well aware of his master's desire to become a hero. Indeed, Midoriya-kun. You'll meet some of your teachers in the coming days. Mind you, he warned, his eyes turning darker, some of them might be extremely difficult to deal with. If their behavior is too much for you, let me know, and I'll talk with them. Izuku swallowed, suddenly keenly aware of the fact that Avenger was a powerful weapon in a human body. Any questions, Midoriya-kun? That snapped Izuku out of his sudden terror. Yes, actually. Both Solomon-san and Guzan-san gave us their own names, instead of class names, whereas you haven't. So, he paused, picking at the edge of his t-shirt, what is your name, Avenger-san? Avenger smiled, a weird and maniacal thing that stretched across his face in an almost unnatural way. My true name, Master? Avenger's smile didn't falter. Well, if you simply must know, I am the reincarnation of vengeance, the grudge of darkness itself. The name I carry, by which you may call me, is Count of Monte Cristo, Edmond Dantes. Izuku's transferring went smoothly, and he'd be able to start following his online classes in 2 weeks, once everything had been properly filed away. Until then, however, he'd train, and he immediately felt that his first trainer might be the toughest one. Get up, mongrel. I'm doing Edmund a favor, and if you're not up to my standards, I won't hesitate to leave you in the dust. Izuku groaned, slowly opening his eyes to an extremely unusual sight. At the foot of his bed, wearing a thick-looking golden set of armor, stood a blond man with red eyes, his arms crossed in front of his chest. Ah, finally you wake. You stand, well, lie, really, in the presence of the king of heroes himself, the first of many, King Gilgamesh, an archer. He paused dramatically, gesturing grandiosely to himself, am here to train you, Midoriya-kun. Izuku swallowed in fear. Something, deep in his guts, whispered that he'd regret accepting this man's help. Ah, you're still alive, Midoriya-kun? Izuku lifted his head just enough to glare at the count. Dante-san, F.U. Language, Izuku. A groan answered Inko's scolding, as Edmund chuckled. I told you that some of them had powerful behaviors. I hope that Gilgamesh didn't annoy you too badly. Izuku groaned, flopping onto his back. Annoy? Well, I guess that His Majesty's tone is a bit too. He made a vague gesture, as if lacking the words to explain, and Edmund nodded. I get it. I wouldn't have sent him to you, however, had I not been sure that he could give you a first briefing into what it means to be a proper hero. And you were right, unfortunately for me. It also SCKS because I learnt a lot, which means that I will want to train more under him, but I barely feel my muscles anymore. It could have been worse, I promise. Izuku turned to stare at the count. How? I'm told that King Arthur's idea of light training involves fighting massive dragons. Izuku swiftly jumped on his side, barely dodging a spear, before hearing a tired sigh. Your movements are too predictable. Frustrated green eyes trained themselves on Gilgamesh, where the blond man was standing, his arms crossed and a vaguely disappointed expression on his face. What do you mean? Izuku bit out, barely managing to keep his annoyance out of his voice, Archer-san. The king gently waved one of his hands, and Izuku relaxed at the gesture, understanding that the practical part was over. I mean that, when you're dodging, your movements are too obvious. You put too much weight on the side you're going to move towards, Gilgamesh continued, slowly approaching Izuku, and you keep your muscles too tightly coiled. If I hit you just slightly harder, you'd fall on your butt, because you'd overbalance. Izuku groaned in frustration, moving to wipe the sweat off his forehead. But I've been following the exact movements you taught me. That's true. In this last couple of months you've made lots of progress, and the issue here isn't fully on your end, Midoriya-kun. Here, the archer slowly took a couple of paces back, the issue may lie in the way you're following too closely my specific style of fighting. That made Izuku's eyebrows furrow in confusion. What? Gilgamesh smirked, finally breaking the disappointed expression. Here's the thing, mongrel, you're tiny. You're shorter than I am, although not as short as I used to be when I was a pipsqueak like you. Thus, he moved to take a fighting stance, which Izuku immediately mirrored. When you try to mimic my movements, they're unbalanced, because you're trying to use stances and attacks that I created for this size of body, not yours. Then what am I supposed to do? That is a DMN good question. A beat of silence, and incredulity. I'll figure it out, talk to Avenger or something. I'm sure that there will be someone as tiny as you are willing to teach you how to fight or something. Now, Gilgamesh looked Izuku over, nodding once. Go hit the showers, you stink. Short session today, then? The king nodded again. Yes, you've got school tomorrow, and Guzan would get sad if I kept you too long. Now scram. Izuku gave a mock salute and, quickly, dashed out of Gilgamesh's range. Ever since he'd changed school, his daily routine had shifted slightly. Izuku would wake up early enough, do some warm-ups and some light training, and then, after breakfast, he'd get to his desk and log into the online school platform. Classes covered the usual subjects, and he occasionally got some free PRDS during which he could interact with his classmates, something that led to his budding friendship with two boys, a blonde one and one with purple hair. So, Kaminari-kun, Izuku inquired during one of these study sessions, what did you get for the math exercise? Denki Kaminari, the blonde one, smiled sheepishly, rubbing the back of his head. Ah, I got 51? That can't be right. The one with purple hair and a tired expression, Hitoshi Shinso, muttered, his brow furrowed, I got 15. Izuku nodded at Shinsu's comment. Yeah, I got the same as Shinsu-kun. Would you mind sharing your worksheet with us, Kaminari-kun? Kaminari nodded, and after a couple of seconds a worksheet appeared in their chat. The other two boys quickly got through it, reading quietly, before Izuku hummed. Ah, I think I see what happened. You missed a minus in the second to last step, and that turned it from a subtraction into an addition. Kaminari, after checking, groaned. Thanks, Midoriya-kun. My dyslexia strikes again, I guess. Shinso smiled. Hey, you're improving though. That was the only mistake, and it was a really minor one. That earned him a happy smile. That's true, but with how our sensei is, that wouldn't have given me enough points to get an acceptable grade on the quiz anyways. I'm sure we'll manage to figure something out, Izuku added, determined. If worse comes to worse, we'll help you pass the year by studying with you the whole break. Another smile, this time directed at Izuku, popped up on Kaminari's face, but before he could add anything, a voice spoke from Izuku's side. Midoriya-kun, your mother wants us to go out to get milk. Kaminari and Shinso perked up at the new voice. Who's that, Mido-kun? Izuku smiled, turning to wave at the intruder. Dante-san, come say hi to Kaminari-kun and Shinsu-kun. Must I? Izuku's expression turned exhausted. Come on, be nice to my friends, please? A sigh could be heard, and then Avenger's face peeked out into Izuku's camera. Greetings, Midoriya-kun's friends. Shinso appeared confused, whereas Kaminari looked like Christmas had come early. Greetings, Dante-san? We're dash. Holy hells, Midoriya, how did you even meet someone with the same name as the Count of Monte Cristo? Both Izuku and Shinso balked at Kaminari's interruption, although for different reasons. The Count of what, now? How do you even know that, Kaminari-kun? Dante's, for his part, was simply shocked. Master, be so kind as to invite your friends over, when you can, he spoke, before getting back up to go warn Inko that they'd leave a bit later. I'm sure that Kaminari-kun will get a kick out of meeting Archer. And with that, Avenger left the room, leaving Izuku to explain the confusing situation of being a master to his new friends. Why would you ever do that, Dante-san? Avenger hid his chuckle in his coat's collar, looking extremely amused by the situation. You've been talking about them for a while, Midoriya-kun. It only felt polite to warn them about the others in advance. Izuku sighed, fondness and annoyance mixed in one single sound. Still, that was so rude. Before they could get into the store, however, a noise caught Avenger's attention, bringing the duo to a stop. Did you hear that, Master? Izuku glanced around, before the noise repeated itself from a nearby alley. Dante surged forwards, ensuring that Izuku would stick behind him as they slowly entered the alley, careful of whatever might be making that noise. It kinda sounded like a cough. Dante's didn't answer, still a step in front of his master, before reaching a couple of trash cans. Behind which? Inko sighed, sitting next to the hospital bed. You're grounded, Izuku. Izuku made an indignant sound, standing next to her. But Mom. No buts, young man. I let you out of my sight for 5 minutes, and then we're at the hospital because you found a random teenager fainted in an alley. It only feels safe to never let you out of the house at least until you have your hero license. Inko's answer shut Izuku up, leaving him to sulk next to his mother. Avenger, who was definitely not memorizing the entire situation for future blackmail purposes, was standing by the door, a silent vigil that would ensure that no one could bother the trio. Izuku's eyes stopped to better observe the teen in the hospital bed. His white hair was covered in soot, to the point that it almost looked black, and his skin looked red and raw, as if he'd barely gotten out of a massive fire. He had yet to regain consciousness, and the only sounds he'd made during the ambulance ride were a couple of whimpers, but the heart monitor kept softly beeping in the background, so Izuku wasn't worried about his survival. What will happen to him, Mom? Inko looked up from the book she'd been pretending to read, quickly checking the injured teen before turning back to Izuku. Well, for now we need to wait for him to wake up. After that he'll have to convalesce, and we'll see if he has any family we can call. What if he has no one? Izuku's question almost made both Dante's and Inko chuckle. That was such an Izuku thing to do, worrying about others at all times. Well, if he has no one, then we'll figure something out. Inko's tone made Dante's chuckle, like mother, like son, apparently. Their conversation was cut short by a doctor entering the room, startling the mother and son duo, and, even though he'd never admit it, almost startling Avenger as well. You're the Midoriyas, correct? Inko rose to her feet, bowing, quickly followed by her soon. Yes, sir. The doctor nodded, moving closer to the bed and starting a routine check for the teenager's vitals. He seems to be doing better. When you brought him in, he was severely dehydrated, and malnourished as well. We don't know anything about him, he doesn't have a record or anything, at least that we could find, so we don't know if he has any family that's looking for him, although. The doctor paused, quickly averting his eyes from the redness that surrounded the teen's hands. I'm worried about his home situation, considering the injuries that he's sporting. Would you two happen to know him? Inko shook her head, eyeing the injuries more carefully. No, my son just happened to find him while out on a grocery run. And it's a good thing that he did. Given his conditions, I doubt he would have survived another week without urgent medical care. Now, I do believe that all he truly needs is to sleep and recover. His burns are mostly healed, thanks to a nurse with a healing quirk that I believe you met earlier, so we'd be willing to discharge him at the end of today, assuming his conditions remain stable. Assuming he'll wake up before then, Inko immediately answered, I'll ask him if he'd like to spend his convalescence with us. Otherwise we'll take him in and cross that bridge when we get to it. The doctor nodded. Very well. I'll get you the discharge documents, then. If you'll excuse me. He bowed, turning to leave. Dante smiled at his master and his mother. Truly, like mother, like son. The softness under his back was unusual. Something he wasn't accustomed to, not anymore, not since he'd left Endeavor's house. He'd been sleeping on the hard ground for a while now, and a mattress was a blessing he couldn't rely on. So when his senses started to come back to him, and he realized that he was laying on a comfortable bed, Tuya sprang up, or at least, he tried to do so, but pain made him wince and lay back down. Hey, don't do that. You'll hurt yourself. The voice was young, and when Tuya opened his eyes again, he saw a young face, probably about Shudo's age, staring at him, with green hair framing it and massive green eyes staring at him, twinkling slightly, almost like there was a star inside of them. The boy handed him a glass filled with water, carefully supporting him while he sat up. Drink slowly, okay? Mom said that your stomach might be upset or something, and that you shouldn't force it too much. The first sip of water went down Tuya's parched throat like a blessing, and when it settled within his stomach, the lack of complaints led him to drink more, until he'd emptied the glass. Thank you. The boy smiled, taking back the glass and putting it on a nearby bedside table. No worries. Give me a sec, I'll send Avenger to get Mom, okay? Tuya barely had the time to nod, unsure of what the boy was talking about, before he darted back to a door, opening it and quickly addressing someone else. Tuya's eyes were drawn to a strange, red mark on the boy's left hand. It looked like a tattoo, in 3 separate strokes, resembling a bird of some kind. He didn't get the time to point that out, however, as shortly afterwards a man in a green cape entered the room, followed by a woman, presumably the kid's parents. How are you feeling, dear? The woman quickly addressed him, while the man moved to get near the window, looking out. He paused, looking back at the woman. I'm a bit in pain, ma'am, but I'm feeling better, thank you. She smiled, extending her hand, a hand that, Tuya noticed, didn't have any marks. Midoriya Inko, dear. Feel free to call me by either my first or my last name, whichever you're more comfortable with. This little hellion here, she paused, ruffling the kid's hair, to which he answered by sticking his tongue at her, is my pride and joy, Izuku, who found you passed out in an alley. And the grumpy man at the window dash. I'm not grumpy, Inko-san, simply cautious. Grumpy and paranoid, then. The grumpy end. paranoid man at the window is Edmund Dantes, or Avenger. Tuya blinked, slowly sifting through the information she'd given out. They'd picked him out of that alley, then. That made sense, he'd remember walking into someone's home and falling asleep in a bed. The only question left, now, was what they wanted with him, or from him. A small movement made him realize that the woman, Midoriya-san's hand was still in front of him, and he hurried to shake it. Oh, I'm Tuya. Just Tuya, if you don't mind. She smiled at him, but he couldn't help but notice how her eyes crinkled before her smile, almost in concern. Very well, Tuya-kun. Would you feel up for some food? Izuku was quite insistent that you'd need your strength to properly recover, and so I made a whole bunch of katsudon. Mom. There was no need to say that. Avenger's eyes softened as he turned to look at Izuku, even though he clearly tried to hide it. I'd like that, thank you very much. I don't know how I can repay you, though. Midoriya-san quickly shook her head, and spoke with a stern but caring voice. None of that, dear. You're a child, I'm a mother. It's my job to ensure that you grow up strong. The katsudon, to Midoriya-san's credit, was delicious. So delicious, in fact, that Tuya finally realized that his burns, while still occasionally aching, weren't as painful as he expected. Another thing he noticed, however, was that Dante-san had vanished at some point before dinner, only to be replaced by a tan man with long, white hair, who was calmly discussing something he called magecraft with Izuku. Once again, Izuku-in, you can't just expect to yell a word and cast a spell, it doesn't work like that. There's a whole theory of magecraft behind it. You have to account for your own mana consumption, the mana in the atmosphere and in the life surrounding you, and the specifics of the spell you're trying to cast. A simple gander shouldn't be an issue anywhere, but anything more complex might cause you some trouble depending on what surrounds you. No, I get that, Solomon-san, but what I'm saying is that, if my quirk actually gave me magic circuits like we're assuming, shouldn't it also mean that I can just, kinda do whatever? We called it the Holy Grail, so can't we just assume that it works like one? Tuya blinked, and clearly his expression was amusing enough to make Midoriya-san chuckle. I know exactly how you're feeling, Tuya-kun. Hearing them talk about that will never get any easier, let me tell you. He nodded, taking another sip of his water. His perpetual thirst was finally quenching, after so long. What's Izuku-kun's quirk, if I may ask? That put a stop to the heated discussion between Izuku and the man called Solomon, gaining their attention. Oh, we called it Holy Grail. We're still figuring out the specifics, but apparently I'm a beacon of magical energy that can summon the shades of heroes from the past, called heroic spirits, to fight at my side. A number of them kinda live with us, on and off since I can only keep one of them summoned at a time, but we're also trying to understand whether me being a living anchor from the throne means that I can also cast actual magecraft. But as I was trying to say, Solomon-san interjected, looking fondly exasperated, assuming that you've got an infinite well of magical energy within you is an excellent way to figure out its limits in a fatal way. Now, I can try to see if I can fit some magical theory in between your other lessons, but I make no promises, alright? Izuku pumped his fist in midair, cheering. Ah, right. Mom, Izuku turned towards Midoriya-san, his excitement now back to manageable levels. Kaminari-kun and Shinsu-kun wanted to come visit, since Avenger showed himself to them. Can they? Please? Inko's expression turned thoughtful, but Tuya could clearly see that she was only pretending to think about it. I don't know, Izuku. Oh, please? Please dash. If it would help, Solomon-san interjected, gently placing a hand in front of Izuku's mouth to cut him off. Either me or Avenger could be there to supervise, Inko-san. Midoriya-san broke under the double begging of the child and man, smiling at Izuku. Oh, alright dear. Just make sure not to do anything reckless, alright? Izuku chuckled at Tuya's half-pout. His mum had to tell their newfound teenager to go sit on the couch 3 times before he folded and stopped trying to help, something that, if Izuku stopped to think about it for long enough, was actually quite worrying. Solomon had retreated back to the throne after helping clean up the table, and had been replaced by Tomo-san, who was now quietly chatting with Inko in the kitchen, leaving the 2 boys in the living room by themselves, with Tuya specifically looking a bit like a deer in the headlights. Tuya-kun? The teenager startled, and a small blue spark sputtered out of his mouth. Before he managed to clamp it back down, Izuku assumed it was his quirk, and barely managed to keep his inner nerd down. Why yes, Izuku-kun? Izuku shuffled a bit in his seat, mentally phrasing the question. Mom's gonna ask you the same thing later, but would you want to stay here, at least until you get better? Tuya blinked. What? Izuku lowered his gaze to his hands, slowly starting to retrace his command spells. Well, the doctor said you need to rest and recuperate for some time, and that if we hadn't found you in that alley you might not have survived, and we kinda assumed that you had nowhere else to go, or no one else you wanted to go to, at least, and so we were wondering if you'd like to stay here with us? Izuku's word vomit clearly took Tuya by surprise, as the teenager blinked again, before gently rubbing his eyes. I do not feel like it's an obligation, dear. Inko's voice startled both of the kids, making them jump in their seat, much to the two women's amusement. Apologies, Tuya-kun. Master, Tomo-san began, bowing slightly with a soft smile on her face. We didn't mean to startle you. Tuya and Izuku waved the apology away, before their attention was once again focused on Inko. To clarify, Tuya-kun, she began, taking a seat on the couch, next to Izuku and in front of Tuya. We'd like you to stay with us for as long as you'd like, assuming that there's nowhere else you'd rather go to. We're not going to force you to stay here if you don't want to be here, and we're not going to make you leave if you want to stay. Once again, Tuya was left speechless, confusion and worry alternating on his face. He managed to choke out, his voice thick with something better left unsaid. I'm not being forced? Inko nodded, and when Tuya turned to look at Tomo-san and at Izuku, both of them nodded as well, as if corroborating Inko's affirmation. Tuya slowly dragged his knees up to his chest, hugging them close. Barely a wince showed on his face. Whether that was because his burns hurt less, or because his pain tolerance was just that high, was something Izuku didn't want to consider. If I'm not a bother, I'd be happy to stay, Midoriya-san. Inko nodded again, a soft smile on her face. Then you're welcome to do so, Tuya-kun. I'll just dash. But, he cut her off, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. You should know the kind of danger you're in by taking me in. Inko's eyebrows furrowed in concern, as Tuya started his grim tale. You see, my name is Tuya Todoroki. Once both Izuku and Tuya had been put to bed, Inko sat, nursing a mug of tea as she let her thoughts lean towards the rage she'd never show her children. Disgusting, what a parent can do to their own child. Avenger's voice was tight, and his hat hid his face in a menacing shadow. That wasn't a parent. Inko took in a long breath, letting the warmth of the tea heat up her hands. That is a monster, who should never have been allowed to be a hero, let alone a parent. That's the industry our Izuku will work in. We'll have to work alongside that shitstain, at some point. Inko nodded, moving mechanically to take a sip of her tea. So, Tuya-kun staying forever, I take it? Dante's question choked a laugh out of Inko. Oh, that boy's never having to see his SPRM donor again if I have anything to say about it. I just need to figure out how to officially adopt him. Dante sighed. Izuku would kill me if he knew I'm doing this, but I've been doing some light information gathering, here and there, on some heroes I know he likes. Inko moved to better look at the heroic spirit, whose hat wasn't hiding his face anymore, showing a faint blush on his pale cheeks. And, as it happens, one of those heroes is surprisingly hard to track, but also incredibly fond of children. His hero name's Eraserhead, and while it was a beach and a half to do, Avenger slid a piece of paper across the table. These are his contact information. Inko covered her mouth with her hands, barely holding back laughter. Ed-kun, she started, amusement leaking out of her words. Did you hack a hero agency in order to ask for an underground hero's autograph for Izuku's birthday? Avenger sighed, hanging his head to hide from his own rising shame, as Inko's soft laughter filled the kitchen. Shoyuta Aizawa, hero name Eraserhead, didn't have a strong opinion on night patrols. On one hand, they took needed time off of his sleep schedule, leaving him exhausted for his teaching job at UA. However, on the other hand, this was half of the reason why he'd chosen to become an underground hero. Night patrols meant less chance to run into the press, after all, and his quirk was heavily dependent on his opponents not being aware of what its activating conditions were. The nighttime environment, however, meant that often enough some threats remained unseen until it was almost too late, something that almost happened on that one night. Shoyuta barely jumped over something, sharply turning on his heels to face whatever had tried to trip him, only for his eyes to zero in on a shadow. The thing, as there was no other way to describe it, looked about human in size, but the way that shadows cloaked around it was unnatural, leaving only two bright red spots around where its eyes should be. Eraserhead, a masculine voice started, how kind of you to join me on this dark night. Shuta's hair sprang up as his quirk activated, to no avail. It seemed that either the figure wasn't using a quirk of his own, or that his quirk didn't have any effects active yet. And who would you be, exactly? The shadow retracted sharply, leaving a man in front of the hero, a man wearing a deep green cloak, which obscured almost all of his features, and an equally dark hat, covering his pale hair and slightly obscuring his face. Me? I'm just a messenger, here to make a humble request to one who cares about the abuses our society bestows upon its weakest components. The way he spoke made Shuta's eyebrows furrow in concern, but he slightly relaxed his stance. If the man meant him harm, he would have done so by now. You're being quite cryptic, aren't you? The man's face broke into a vicious smile, all teeth and almost no mirth. My apologies, Eraserhead. I do believe that's part of the appeal, but for the sake of the one under my protection, I shall be your Abbe Faria and lead you out of this darkness. The man approached Shoyuta, before one hand extended itself out of the cloak, holding a folded piece of paper. Come to this address tomorrow afternoon, once you're done with your classes. Feel free to bring your son, and your husband too, should you feel particularly paranoid. Shuta's eyebrows furrowed further. What do you want from my family? The man's face turned serious. We mean you no harm, Eraserhead. My master's particularly impressed by your career, but it's other, more unfair circumstances that lead us to asking for your assistance. The man turned around, his cloak billowing in the night for a second, before coming back to rest around his form. Come to that address, and you'll get your answer. And, before Shoyuta could answer any further, the man jumped down from the roof. When the pro rushed to check on him, however, he'd vanished. While his brooding protector was away, Izuku's mind swam in a gentle dream, before slowly steadying itself in a more stable place. Darkness surrounded him, enveloping all his senses. Nothing could be smelled, or seen, or touched, as the darkness covered all. Hello? Izuku started, looking around the empty space. Is anyone there? A single spotlight turned on, its bright light enveloping Izuku's form, momentarily blinding him. So, you're the new master everyone's been talking about? A female voice rang out in the hollow space, commanding, no, demanding attention, and not taking a no for an answer. Izuku suddenly felt very seen, almost as if he were being picked apart by someone studying him. You don't look like much, but you also are a lot smaller than my last preacher, so it might just be a matter of age. Izuku's mind sharply connected itself back to the conversation, finally snapping out of the daze he'd been in since he entered this portion of the dream. Wait a second. He turned around wildly, desperately trying to spot the figure that was talking to him. Are you a servant? Where are we? The voice chuckled in the darkness. Indeed. I am a servant, young master. As for where we are, the light didn't extend itself, nor did anything else change, but something in the way she paused suggested to Izuku that she was physically showing off the place. This is a mental space I materialized in your dreams. Feel free to praise me for that. Izuku blinked, still turning around and squinting to try and see through the thick darkness. I would, but, he turned once more, trying to pinpoint where the voice was coming from. Well, I can't see. A sharp tch came out of the darkness. That's so, huh? It would make sense, you're too young to be a fully fledged mage, let alone a master. Who are you? Is there a name that I can use for you? The woman hummed in the dark, thoughtful. If you must use a name for me, you may call me Coccinia, for now. Izuku nodded, unsure if she could see him or not. Coccinia-san, then. May I ask what your business with me might be? Another chuckle, this time louder. That's the respect I was looking for. As for your question, master, Izuku felt a billowing, similar to Avengers when his cape got dislodged from moving around too quickly. I am here to observe you, to determine whether your light is bright enough to guide me to the stars I seek, or whether you'll fall to the pit of corruption that is this world. Izuku's eyebrows furrowed, confusion slowly overtaking him, before a dizzy spell made him stumble. I see that our time is up. I shall speak to you more soon, master. Until then, I'll be watching. And then, Izuku was falling, darkness once again enveloping him. Stir? Master. Izuku sprang up, almost headbutting Solomon. I'm awake. I didn't turn off the alarm, what's going on? Solomon was standing next to the bed, looking slightly concerned but no worse for wear, with a very awkward-looking Tuya standing behind him. Tuyakuen came to get me, he said you were muttering something about a servant? Izuku blinked, trying to grasp at the fading edges of his dream, a dream that, much like smoke, was refusing to be bottled by human hands. He leaned to the side, grasping a bottle of water from his nightstand and taking a sip from it. I think I was dreaming of something? But I can't remember, now. Solomon shook his head, sighing in relief. That's fine, Izuku-kun. I'm glad everything's okay, and, he turned, addressing Tuya, thank you, Tuyakuen, for coming to get me. The teenager blushed, rubbing the back of his head awkwardly. I didn't do anything special. Maybe so, Solomon started, smiling gently, but had it been something serious, your quick wits would have allowed us to help Izuku-kun much sooner, so thank you for that. Tuya nodded, still red in the face, as Solomon walked past him, gently patting his head. Now then, I'll go let Inko-san know that everything's okay, and we'll be waiting for you in the kitchen for breakfast, okay? Tuya just nodded, while Izuku chirped out an okay before jumping out of bed and gathering his clothes. Tuya-kun? The teen looked at Izuku, a dash of worry still clear on his face. Thank you. You're a good person, and I really appreciate you looking out for me. Tuya swallowed, before nodding. It's nothing, Izuku-kun. I'm glad I could be of assistance. Izuku smiled, gently bumping into Tuya before heading out. Mum left you some clothes on my desk, check if any of them fit and wear what you're most comfortable with, he added, almost out of the door. We'll probably go shopping for more stuff soonish, though. And with that, Izuku left, leaving Tuya unable to complain about it. The house looked normal enough. Certainly not like a threatening den of evil which could harm Shoyuta or his family, at least. Hisashi Yamada, hero name present Mike, gently bumped Shuta's shoulder. You're worrying too much. Nizu ran his checks. It's a regular family home, nothing weird about it. Shoyuta sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know, Zashi. I'm worried about you too, though. Hitoshi Shinso squeezed his dad's hand. You guys are here, aren't you? I'll be fine, Dad. And with that, the trio approached the door and rang the doorbell. Coming. A masculine voice rang out from behind the door, different from the one the strange man had in the previous night. Izuku-kun, if you keep trying to trip me I will lock you in a magic prison for a little bit, don't think I won't. That affirmation made Shuta's eyebrows furrow slightly, but it was followed by a childish giggle, and then the door opened, revealing a man wearing a very ancient-looking dress. Oh, you must be Aizawa-san and Yamada-san. Edmund had let us know you'd be stopping by, I just didn't dash. Midoriya-kun? A head of green hair peeked out from behind the man, before breaking into a smile and dashing forwards, enveloping Hitoshi in a hug. Shinsu-kun. The two boys fell in a tumble of limbs and giggles, almost falling down the stairs before a blue aura surrounded them, lifting them up. Izuku-kun, I told you to be more careful. Shuta's eyes darted back to the man, who had lifted a hand and was gently moving it, apparently powering whatever that force field was. Hisashi, wonderful man that he was, started, a bit out of his depth, I believe that you shouldn't be using your quirk that openly, sir? The man blinked, before shaking his head. Right. Quirks. This isn't one of those, but he rubbed his head with his free hand, before gesturing for the men to follow him inside. It's complicated. Come on in, I'll let Inko-san that you're here. And, almost before they could reply, the children were safely placed inside the house, entirely unharmed and still hugging. Inko-san, we have guests. Another head of green hair emerged, this time from the kitchen, and the resemblance with Izuku-kun was so clear, there was no doubt in Shuta's mind that this had to be his mother. Thank you, Solomon. Aizawa-san, Yamada-san, the woman approached them, wiping her hands on an apron before offering one of them to the duo to shake it. Thank you for coming over. I'm Inko Midoriya, it's a pleasure to meet you. Hisashi was the first one to snap out of his daze, giving the woman a brilliant smile and shaking his hand. Likewise, Midoriya-san. Thank you for having us, he started, his smile unwavering, although we'd probably appreciate less cryptic methods to get in touch, next time. Midoriya-san shook her head, a fond smile appearing on her face. I'm truly sorry for whatever Avenger did or said, that's just how he tends to be. Izuku-kun momentarily stopped dragging Hitoshi, whose face was the happiest Shoyuta had ever seen it, only to turn around with a curious expression on his face. What did Avenger do? Shoyuta groaned and Hisashi, blessed man that he is, took up the tale without him even needing to ask. When the door closed behind them, following a request to bring Hitoshi-kun over whenever you want, Shoyuta shivered in anger. The grip that Hisashi had on his hand let him know that he felt the same way. Shoyuta took in a deep breath, held it in for a second, and then let it out, allowing his shoulders to relax. Hey, Hito, he started instead, turning to look at their son, did you have fun? The kid nodded excitedly. Yeah. Can we please come visit Izuku again? Can we, Dad? Shoyuta smiled, ruffling Hitoshi's messy hair. Of course we can, kiddo. Besides, he continued, starting to walk away from the house, I have a nagging feeling that we're not gonna get away from this family anytime soon. How's Tuya-kun? Izuku's question to Solomon was answered by a calm smile. Sleeping, currently. I do believe that the poor kid has been worrying himself silly for a while, and that clearly took its toll on his sleep schedule. The young master nodded, twirling his pencil in his hand with a frowning expression. So, Eraserhead-san. He's Aizawa-san for us, Izuku-kun. Izuku nodded. Right, Aizawa-san will fix this issue for us, right? Tuya-kun will be able to stay with us, and to do whatever he wants to do, right? Solomon nodded, putting down his book. Of course. It may take him some time, but he's going to make sure that this situation is resolved. Izuku nodded, turning his attention back to the sheet of paper Solomon had given him. His retainer's understanding of magical theory was, of course, unparalleled. He had, after all, been the one to properly create the system that the previous mages had been using. Neither of them had been entirely sure that Izuku could actually learn to properly cast spells. The mana levels in the atmosphere had apparently dropped drastically since the last summoning of the various servants, and Izuku still wasn't entirely sure that he actually possessed working magical circuits. He'd been deep in thought, quietly scribbling on his piece of paper, when something sparked. Neither Izuku nor Solomon would have been able to explain what, actually, happened. 1 second earlier, they'd both been focused on their own reading, and 1 second after, Izuku's paper was softly smoking, as a vaguely sizzling sound filled the room. Solomon's quick thinking nipped the fire in its bud, a quick water spell later, with words spoken so quickly that Izuku could barely understand that they were words, and the paper had stopped smoking. Izuku-kun, please warn me next time you decide to practice a spell, would you? Izuku blinked. I wasn't trying to practice anything? Solomon stared at him, curiosity quickly overriding his stern expression. So you didn't mean to attempt to cast a fire spell? His master shook his head. No, I wasn't trying to do anything, I was just writing down the symbols for Jewel Magecraft. Neither said anything else for a couple of seconds, before Solomon stood up. Well, I think that's enough studying for today. We should probably continue tomorrow, preferably outside. Izuku couldn't object to that. The darkness seemed to have cleared slightly, since his last visit. You're growing quickly, Praetor. The voice was clearer, too, and Izuku could almost make out the vague light of a sword, almost entirely enveloped in the darkness. Coccinia-san, thank you for having me again. A satisfied chuckle. My, how polite. Rest easy, my contractor, for you shall be allowed to leave again today. Izuku's eyes narrowed, once again searching the darkness to try and locate his mysterious servant. Your light has drawn someone from their shadow, and you've changed their future. I've decided to grant you a little bit of power. He could feel some movement, as if the servant had moved her hair, or her cloak, not like you actually needed my permission to access it. Izuku frowned. You've given me power? Indeed, master. It's only fair that we share our power, is it not? He blinked, even more confused. I'm afraid I don't really understand, Coccinia-san. She chuckled. And you won't for quite some time, I'm afraid. But don't worry, all will become clear to you, at some point. Izuku mulled over her words for a second, before deciding to voice his thoughts. How are we linked exactly, Coccinia-san? The servant was quiet for a second, the quiet wind billowing through the destroyed structure they were in. We have a contract, of course. Not that I needed one to be here, she amended, her words still calm and pondered, but I thought it might make the others feel more at ease. The others? He could feel her movement, as she slowly circled around him. Your other servants. Those Avengers of yours tend to be awfully worried, much like they were around them back then. Those words made Izuku frown. Wait, Avengers? Plural. But those words had barely left his mouth, before the darkness enveloped him again. The weeks passed, turning into months. Tuya informed his new family of his birthday, and while it had already passed, they still threw him a huge party to celebrate him. Both of the Midoriya children kept up with their studies, strictly online, getting good grades and helping each other out, as much as Izuku could help a teenager with advanced trigonometry, that is. Aizawa-san kept popping in every now and then, with and without Hitoshi and Yamada, and while Eraserhead's mood kept being extremely dark, the results he brought showed that the fight with Endeavor was going well. Midoriya-san, if not for the fact that I have a child and a husband, I swear I'd be tempted to murder that man. Aizawa-san. Inko's shocked retort was accompanied by a hand going to cover her mouth. I'm sorry, but it's true. The things that man has done to his kids. Shuta's hand gripped more tightly the mug of tea, a dark expression passing over his face. The worst part is that, while Endeavor appears to be relenting over Tuya's custody, there's no way the court will also award us custody over his youngest child. Inko's brows furrowed, following Shuta's reasoning. Has he? The two adults turned almost in sync, checking whether the kids were paying them any attention. Luckily, Izuku and Hitoshi had joined forces in an attempt to annoy Tuya, who was trying to read in a corner and instead had to dodge the two hellions who kept jumping on his back. The evidence is apparently inconclusive, according to the court, Shoyuta picked up again, his tone carefully controlled, but Nizu, the principal, that is, has reason to believe that the youngest is being abused too. It's all being branded as training, however, and we'd need a court mandate to pull any documents that could prove otherwise. Inko gently put her mug down, taking a shaky breath. Unfortunately, we have reason to believe that the court is in Endeavor's pockets either directly or indirectly through the Hero Commission. A nod, another shaky breath. One step at a time, then. Let's work on getting what we can, and I'm sure we'll figure something out eventually, won't we? Shoyuta nodded. So, Izuku began, twirling his pencil in his hands, middle school's almost over for you, 2NII. Have you decided on what to do next? Tuya's hands moved to put down the book he was reading, careful to mark the page he'd reached before closing it. I'm thinking of going into heroics. Izuku looked at his brother, a recent development, yet one that had been highly celebrated by the extended Midoriya household. It'll likely be a tough path to walk, Tuya continued, moving one hand to play with his white hair, that was growing longer by the day, especially with the bast, Endeavor, trying to stop me at each step, but I want to make it. I want to give hope to other kids. Izuku smiled, getting up from his desk to go sit next to Tuya on his bed. I'm proud of you. And we'll be on your side throughout it all, for anything you might need. Tuya laid his head on his little brother's shoulder, taking a deep breath as he did so. Do you think, he started, pausing as he fiddled with the hem of his shirt, do you think any of your heroes can give me pointers on my quirk? Izuku paused, momentarily deep in thought. Of the few he'd seen so far, only Guzen-san truly used fires. Avenger used some level of fire, but his seemed to be a more conceptual kind of fire, rather than the actual, physical thing. It was as he was deep in his musings that Izuku's command spells started glowing, filling the room with a faint red glow, that slowly turned to blue and then white, before the glow vanished, leaving a new figure in the middle of the room. The woman was wearing black armor, and her platinum hair was tied in a long braid, reaching halfway through her back. She carried a flag with a strange symbol, resembling some kind of flower, and a sword was sheathed at her side as she turned to look at the two siblings with a scowl. Servant, Avenger, summoned upon your request. Tuya just balked at the woman, while Izuku blinked, curiosity etched in every line of his face. What's with that look? You asked, I delivered. Izuku nodded, trying to talk twice before words came out of his mouth. Avenger-san? Would you mind telling us your name? The woman sighed. Fine, but only because you're asking, master. Listen well, for I won't say it a second time. She stood straighter now, less leaning on her flag and more proudly holding it up, am Jean Dark, the Dragon Witch. Tuya collapsed on his back, panting heavily with a water bottle in his hand. Fing hell kid, who trained you? It's like. They were trying to get you to burn yourself to cinders, Jean scoffed, sitting down next to him. Sheet, I'd hope not, Tuya panted, his breath still mostly out of him, considering that the flaming pile of trash wanted me to be his successor. Jean hummed, turning her attention back to the yard they were training in. Most of the targets that her master had brought in with Gilgamesh's help had been vaporized by Tuya's attacks, but his control was lackluster at best. It feels like whoever trained you was only trying to get you to use as much power as possible, with zero concerns on technique or finesse. Which, she paused, weighing her words, while I can definitely understand it, is not a smart call for every opponent. Tuya huffed out a laugh, finally bringing himself up to a sitting position to drink. Understatement of the century, he answered, smirking, but yeah, that's kinda what dear old dad was focused on. His eyes stopped on Izuku, who was sitting in a corner with Shinsu-kun and Kaminari-kun, all huddled together over some maths homework. Well, either way, Jean continued, your constitution doesn't allow for this kind of strategy. Sure, you could probably pull off 1 or 2 attacks like that in a pinch, but the nerve damage would quickly pile up, and I'm sure you don't want to die on the job. Tuya shook his head, his smirk fading off his face. No, I'd actually like to see my brother grow into a fine hero himself, Jean-san. Drop the honorifics, don't need M. And, she continued, standing up and offering him a hand to pull him up, if you want to make it far enough to see Master become a hero, then we'll need to work on smaller, more focused bursts. Tuya nodded, moving to pick at his lower lip as he thought out loud. Izuku mentioned something about support equipment that'll allow me to tolerate the heat for longer times, but that's going to be relevant once I go pro, he continued, stretching and taking up a relaxed stance, so until then, I'll have to make sure I can handle the basics on my own. Jean nodded, smirking, and the training resumed. Honestly, Izuku chuckled, handing his brother a pack of chips, you're so dramatic. Jean-san was going easy on you. Tuya groaned, face first into a pillow. Besides, that was only quirk practice. She didn't even make you run an obstacle course while she shot arrows at you from any direction. Tuya's face immediately turned to look at Izuku, worry and anger mixing in his expression. What? That's just His Majesty's way of teaching. And it did make me more agile. The archer in question walked in, his armor replaced by a comfy-looking, if still impossibly wealthy-looking, business suit. Ah, just who I was hoping to see. Master, Gilgamesh started, his tone carefully neutral, I believe your friends are still looking for you, and if the blonde one keeps hammering me with questions, I believe I might just shove him in my gate of Babylon. Izuku turned with a sharp expression. You will do no such thing. Sorry too, and he turned back to his brother, I'm gonna need to go ensure that Kaminari-kun doesn't get turned into a kebab. With that, the young master dashed away, leaving only the archer and Tuya in the living room. So, you made him run an obstacle course while shooting arrows at him? Gilgamesh sighed, taking a seat on the couch. I did, but only when I was sure he could handle it. It's not in my best interest to murder my own master, he paused, listening to the children's voices echoing down the hall, especially since he's my only connection to this world. Tuya nodded, moving to a sitting position with a groan. Why are you asking? I'm going to be a hero, just like Izuku wants to be one. Gilgamesh waited. My quirk, that is, my power over fire, it's dangerous to my body. And, he moved to fiddle with the hem of his shirt, while Jin-san has been helping me with control, and finer accuracy, I know I won't be able to rely on my quirk in the same way as other people with fire powers do. A pause, in which Tuya took a deep breath. So, I guess that what I'm trying to ask is dash. Fine, you mongrel, you needn't make such a big deal of it. Gilgamesh stood up, stretching. I'll make it so that your body is fit to keep you alive in even the harshest of battles. Tuya's eyes jumped up, from the floor to Archer's face. No need to be so surprised. You're my master's brother, and if you're happy, he's going to be happy too. We're starting tomorrow, make sure to get plenty of rest, Gilgamesh smiled, all teeth, because I will demolish you. Tuya swallowed, worried. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. The constant training was harsh for Tuya, but not as harsh as Endeavor's had been, and he felt like he was actually improving. His control over cremation had improved considerably, as well as his stamina and agility. Focusing on shorter, more controlled bursts of fire lead to a noticeable decrease in the rate of burns that Tuya was sustaining, to the point that his skin was barely red most of the time. The fact that Izuku usually joined the training sessions with Gilgamesh definitely helped. Seeing his pipsqueak of a brother keep up with his own training regimen meant that Tuya gave it his all at all time, at least to not be overshadowed by his own brother. However, the comfort of habit quickly led to the Midoriya household growing relaxed enough that, one day, Izuku and Tuya went out to pick up groceries. None of Izuku's servants had followed them, for whatever reason, and the two siblings were enjoying the day off training, something that Tuya had to be convinced to take, considering that his entrance exam was approaching. I keep telling you, Izuku started, once again, as they approached the underpass, if you keep pushing yourself that hard, you'll get sick on the day of the exam and flunk it. And I keep telling you, Tuya replied. Faux frustration leaking into his tone, that I'm not going to get sick, because my immune system is too strong for a noise. It was barely audible, but just strong enough to stop both of the kids in their tracks. Tuya stopped talking, and subtly stepped in front of Izuku, quirk at the ready. Izuku felt some semblance of déjà vu, as he turned around and saw, once again, that a car had driven up to the entrance of the underpass, cutting off the way they'd come in. When he turned back to the way they were going, his eyes focused on another car stopping right in front of them. They've cut off our way in, as well as the only way out. Izuku's whispered words were acknowledged with a nod on Tuya's part, as a man started approaching. Midoriya Izuku? We need you to come with us. Slightly turning was enough to confirm that yes, there was another man there. Who are you? Why do you need my brother to come with you? Tuya's words brought the men's attention on him. It's classified, son. All you need to know is that he'll be safe with us. The two men had no clear indicators of what their quirks might be, and they looked similar, too. The identical outfits, sunglasses, and why would they be wearing those things, especially since it was cloudy, and very similar looks made it clear that whoever sent them wanted them to be as anonymous as possible. Sorry, I can't let you take him off the streets like that. The man in front of them grimaced. Step back, kid, or things you'll get messy real quick. Tuya brought his hands up, in exactly the kind of position that Gilgamesh had drilled into him. No can do, sir. Izuku felt, once again, his command spells burning, as a bright blue light started surrounding them. He vaguely heard one of the men yell something, before a loud gunshot was heard. And nothing happened. Cowards, and you call yourselves warriors? Izuku turned around as the light finally dimmed, only to come face to face, well, face to back, with a woman clad in black, carrying a long, red spear that was extended outwards, as if blocking something. Try again, and show me what you've got. Fail, she continued, pointing her spear at one of the men, and your life is mine. The man on the back was either braver than the other, or more foolish, as he pointed his gun at the woman and shot at her again, only to see her deflect his bullets with her spear, quickly approaching him before she hit him on the temple with the butt of her weapon, immediately knocking him out. He's using his quirk. I need to dash. No you don't. The woman shot forwards, vaulting over Izuku and Tuya with her spear pointed at the man, and Izuku called to her. Lancer. Incapacitate him, don't kill him. The spells burned again, and one of them, just like it had happened a while back, drained itself. Partial true name deployment. The Lancer knocked the man back with the butt of her spear, before pinning her arm back, preparing to move. This spear is an embodiment of who I am. Energy seemed to be gathering around the spear, and I am the epitome of the spear. The energy spiked out, almost marking a path outwards to the man. Gi-Balg alternative. The spear hit its mark as soon as those words were spoken, knocking him against the car, where he slumped over. The spear, almost on its own, flew back into the woman's hand, where it rested, as the woman surveyed the area. Enemies subdued. Are you alright? She turned back towards Tuya and Izuku, who both nodded, before Izuku spoke again. Thank you for your help, Lancer-san. He scratched his head, only one wing and the body now visible on his left hand, but, forgive me, I believe I don't know your name? The woman nodded, lowering the mask that covered her mouth. I came from the land of shadow, she replied, leaning against her spear, and my name is Shathak. I believe you are my master. It was Izuku's turn to nod, as Tuya took out his phone, quickly dialing a number. Aizawa-san? It's Tuya. Silence. No, we're fine, we were just attacked. Another beat of silence. Yes, one of Izuku's heroic spirits showed up to save the day. Tuya nodded, after a second. Got that. See you. As he hung up, Tuya turned to Izuku. Aizawa-san said he'd come pick these guys up, and that we should stay put. I should ground you both until you have your hero licenses, Shoyuta groaned as soon as he dropped down from the bridge. In our defense, Izuku began, sheepish, we didn't do anything to draw attention? Shoyuta raised an eyebrow, pointedly not looking at Lancer, who was standing guard in front of the tied-up men. She appeared of her own volition. Eraser's eyes darted to Tuya, who was leaning against a wall while following the conversation with an amused smile, looking for confirmation. Is it true, Tuya-kun? The teenager shrugged. I mean, yeah, I've never seen Shathak-san before today. He paused, straightening out his shirt, and she did appear out of nowhere, kinda like Jin-san did a while back. I'm starting to think that Izuku's quirk might be sentient or cursed. Shoyuta groaned, rubbing a hand against his face. It's not cursed, it's just the throne responding to the only master alive. Shathak's voice startled everyone, but caught their attention. Would you mind explaining yourself better? Izuku began, the first to recover his voice. Lancer? The woman turned away from the tied-up men, and towards her master and his companions. You're the only tie we have to this world. The throne of heroes is somewhat aware of that. She paused for a moment, pondering her words, or at the very least, the world is aware of that. Either way, they're trying to protect you, and thus we can manifest somewhat spontaneously. There was a beat of silence, before Shoyuta spoke again. That makes absolutely zero sense. Tuya nodded, and Izuku shrugged. Magecraft makes about as much sense as you'd expect. Shathak-san, he turned to speak to his servant, did any of our guests regain consciousness? Shathak turned back to the men, only to see that one of them was slowly opening his eyes. She nodded, and Shoyuta stepped forward, kneeling in front of the man. You're under arrest for attempted kidnapping. You'd better have good lawyers, he continued, as he slapped quirk-suppressing cuffs on both of the men, as you targeted someone that UA has a strong interest in, and I'm told that Nizu-sama knows how to make something like this hurt. The man swallowed loudly, but said nothing else as Shoyuta lifted him up to his feet and picked up his companion. You two walk back home, no stops anywhere. I'm trusting you, he addressed Shathak, to get them home safe and sound. The Lancer nodded, her spear ready at her side. I'd die before letting any harm befall my master. Shoyuta nodded back, a bit uncomfortable with that statement, before heading off towards the police station. The darkness enveloping Izuku was somewhat more anxious than usual. If Lancer hadn't appeared when she did. Coxinia's voice was half a step away from distressed, as she kept muttering to herself, apparently unaware of Izuku's presence. Coxinia-san? She stopped talking, as her mouth clicked shut, and Izuku felt her full attention onto him. Ah, master. You're here, and unscathed, I see. Good, good, she paused, fiddling with her cloak in the barely visible arena. I was worried about you. Izuku smiled sheepishly. Well, Shathak-san saved us, so I think there's nothing to worry about? Coccinia just gave a non-committal hum, a sound that made it extremely clear what she thought about that. Alea has been a lot more involved with your life than anyone else's. At least, it wasn't that involved with their life. Izuku's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. Alea? The world. It's another name for the collective consciousness of mankind. Whenever something's a threat to humanity's survival, she continued, gesturing with her hands, Alea summons heroic spirits to dispatch that threat. It's highly unusual for it to summon servants to protect one specific human, so for it to happen twice. Izuku chewed his lip, thought swirling through his head. Wait, why should Alea be watching over me specifically? Coccinia shrugged, something that Izuku realized he could somewhat see in the darkness. Can't tell ya, sorry master. Izuku's face contracted into a frown, but before he could question it further, the darkness enveloped him again. So, not you, eh? Tuya shook his head, fiddling with a pencil under Aizawa's gaze. No, I'd rather not go there. Not that I don't trust you or Nizu-sama, he hastily added, spinning the pencil around, but I don't trust that Endeavor wouldn't do something uncouth to push me out, considering that that's his alma mater. Aizawa nodded, leaning back into his chair as he looked towards the hallway, listening for any sign of Izuku, Hitoshi and Denki getting into trouble. After hearing none, he turned back towards Tuya. Then I'd also suggest avoiding Ci and Shiketsu. Tuya's face took a questioning expression, which prompted Aizawa to explain. They're both schools with deep ties to the Hero Commission, and we have good reason to believe that the Commission was, if not entirely aware of it, at least willing to overlook what Endeavor did. He paused, twirling a portion of his scarf around his hand, so it's not impossible to think that they might be willing to make it harder for you to get through your education. Tuya nodded, leaning back down to his paper and scratching another couple of names off his list. Then that leaves me with Ketsubutsu as my most accessible option, I guess. There's also Seijin, but I'm not too fond of the ninja look, so I'll have to pass. Aizawa leant over, checking the list of names that Tuya had written down, before nodding. Ketsubutsu is unfairly rated as a mediocre hero school, he sighed, shaking his head, and I'd know that's unfair, considering that one of my best friends teaches there. It was then that, unfortunately for Aizawa's composure, Inko chose to step out of the kitchen. Oh my, you hadn't told us about any other friends, Shotokuin. Aizawa groaned. That's because I value my privacy, Inko-san. Both mother and son chuckled at that, as Tuya picked up an empty form and filled it out. So, I take it I can entrust this to you then, uncle? If Aizawa was startled by Tuya calling him that, he didn't show it. Rather, he took the filled-out form from Tuya's extended hand, folded it, and put it in his pocket. Sure. I'll make sure that Emi gets it, this way I can warn her about the kind of hellion I'm setting onto her school. The final couple of weeks passed uneventfully, and thus Tuya found himself standing in front of the gates for Ketsubutsu High. No biggie, I'm sure you'll do fine. He shivered at that voice, turning towards his trainer. Remind me why you chose to accompany me, he asked, eyeing her with a note of curiosity. Alter-san? Jean shrugged, crossing her arms. Master asked me to, said it's training to see how far from him we can manifest. Tuya sighed in relief. That was a good reason. But also, I couldn't let my pupil head into his exam without making sure that his head was clear enough. That was not. I'll be fine, Alter. I got the best training I could get, my quirk has grown exponentially, as has my control over it. Jean was about to add something else, when a flap of wings drew the pair's attention. A young man with bright, red wings landed gracefully right beside them, whistling while looking at the school. DMN, Ketsubutsu's not messing around with the size of their campus, huh? Not as big as UA's, but still. Tuya's eyes were drawn to the boys' ones. There were some weird markings around them, not too different from those that some predatory birds have, but his focus was also on their color, as that deep amber was unlike anything he'd ever seen before. The boy was wearing comfortable clothes, not dissimilar from Tuya's own, with the only difference being an aviator jacket that looked slightly too big for his frame. After another second of looking at the school, the boy turned towards Tuya and Jean, and his expression took a sheepish smile. Oops, sorry, I was a bit taken with the school and didn't really see you there. Tuya swallowed around a weird lump in his throat before shaking his head. Nah, you're good. I'm Midoriya Tuya, she's one of my brother's retainers, Jean, he continued, offering the boy his hand to shake, and you are. That smile turned brilliant, although Tuya couldn't shake the feeling that it didn't reach all the way to his eyes, as he took his hand. Pleasure to meet ya, Midoriya-san, Midoriya-kun. I'm Hawks. If either Tuya or Jean had found it weird to be referred to as Midoriya, neither showed it, rather, something else made Tuya blink. Hawks. The boy shrugged. Yup. My retainer suggested that I just use a hero name in place of my own, as a good luck charm? It kinda stuck, Sue. Tuya would have said something, but Jean made a show of checking a phone she didn't have before huffing. Well, that's all the time that I have, twerp. Give hell, and don't come home too burnt, yeah? Tuya nodded, turning to face his trainer at full attention. Yes ma'am. She smiled, and all of Tuya's nerves were suddenly way more on edge than the exam had made him feel. The week between the exam and the results' arrival was hell in the Midoriya household. Tuya had refused to speak a single word about it, just saying that it was unusual, but he had been actively texting with Hawks, who'd given him his phone number after the exam. Jean, unable to get the information out of her pupil, had taken to training Izuku, something that the young master found extremely terrifying. Inko, after ascertaining with both Jean and Tuya that neither of her boys were hurt, let them do their own thing. And then, both faster than expected and too slowly, a letter came in the mail. Stamped, signed, and addressed from Ketsubutsu High to one Midoriya Tuya. The kitchen was buzzing with quiet tension as Izuku scribbled something down in his notebook, listening to Hitoshi's and Denki's input, while Inko was sipping some tea and reading a book, flanked by Jean, who hadn't interrupted her own manifestation for a single second throughout the whole week, something that the other heroic spirits were certainly said about. Tuya sat at the table, the letter in front of him, before Jean shot him a look, one that promised hellfire for both himself and the letter if he didn't open it quickly. He swallowed, steeling his nerves, and cautiously ripped it open, as if the letter could bite him. Inside the envelope there was a single sheet of paper, folded thrice, which Tuya opened and quickly scanned, before sinking into his chair. I'm in. I'm in. The tension exploded like a rubber band in a raucous chorus of cheers, which was quickly interrupted when Tuya was tackled into the ground by three overexcited soon-to-be teenagers. You good, twerp? Tuya groaned from the floor at Jean's question. Good, you're not dead. Up you get then. She hoisted him up by his arm, before ruffling his hair. I ain't going to say it a second time, so hear it well. She paused, looking to her side as her cheeks became slightly dusted in red. You did a good job, and I'm proud of ya. That comment caused a second raucous explosion, and it finally broke Tuya's inner tension, making him manifest his own Midoriya genes. The first day was just barely less stressful than the wait for the results, Tuya thought as he walked inside Ketsubutsu High. The uniform was surprisingly comfortable, consisting of a polo shirt and a pair of slacks, and it helped that, as soon as the school had gotten his quirk specifics, they'd invested in making sure that his uniform was fireproof, something that took a big load off of Tuya's mind. Let's see, he muttered, checking the paper for the 20th time that morning. I'm in 1C, which is on the first floor. Just before he could turn a corner, however, he felt something grab his back and spin him around, face to face with a familiar pair of amber eyes. Hawks. Midoriya-kun. Good to see you, buddy. Tuya's face cracked in a cheerful grin at the sight of his friend. So, where did they put you? Hawks took out his own sheet of paper, showing it to Tuya. 1C. Can't say I care too much for the letters, to be honest, but the C is a nice one. What about you? Tuya smiled, gently elbowing him. Well, as luck would have it, I'm in 1C with you. Hawks was about to say something else, when someone cleared their throat right behind him. If you two are done being so disgustingly cheerful this early in the morning, a woman with bunny ears barked, annoyance dripping from her every word, maybe we could all get to the FING 1C room, yeah. When Hawks moved out of the way, Tuya came to see the girl who'd spoken. She was shorter than both of them, but she clearly had more muscle mass, although the most prominent detail in her physique were the pair of bunny ears sprouting from her head, as well as the extremely unusual pair of boots she wore, clearly something she had to wear to protect heteromorphic feet. Sorry to stop you, miss, it's just that Hawks and I were dash. Yeah, the whole school heard you. Midoriya, was it? Tuya nodded, slightly on edge because of the similarity between this girl and Jean. Cool. We'll be in 1C together, the three of us. I'm Rumi Usugiyama, she huffed, pushing a strand of hair out of her face, but you can call me Rumi. My last name's kind of a mouthful anyways. She offered them her hand, and Tuya was the first to grab it to shake it. Nice meeting you, I'm Tuya Midoriya dash. He was about to say something else, when suddenly her grasp tightened, and he shut his mouth with a click to keep himself from crying out in pain. She let go of his hand, seemingly having appraised him, before Hawks reached over to shake her hand. When she pulled the same stunt, his smile didn't even falter, something that Tuya found extremely unnerving. His high school experience was already shaping up to be something interesting. Not having Tuya at home to study with was something new. The house was quieter, more relaxed, in a way. But it also felt emptier. Izuku sighed, twirling a pencil in his hand as he checked over the sheet Denki had sent him. This should all be correct, as long as I didn't mess anything up. He looked up into the monitor, at his friend's face, before beaming at him. Yup, that's all correct, Denki-kun. No mistakes at all. Denki sighed in relief. Man, you have no idea how happy I am to hear that. A chuckle startled both of the boys, as Hitoshi had come back with a bottle of water. Oh, trust us, we know. After all, he continued, tucking a strand of hair under his headphones, we were the ones who spent all that time listening to you about how awful it would be if the teacher didn't pass you. Izuku covered his mouth with one hand, hiding his own amusement, while Denki squawked, embarrassed at being called out. A knock at Izuku's door took his attention away from the call, however, and when he turned he saw Lancer looking at him. Sorry guys, Scathach-san is asking for me. I'll talk to you later. With a hurried bye, Izuku clicked off the call, and, after turning his computer off, followed Scathach out. So, Lancer-san, he started, staring at the massive trash heap in front of him, what are we doing here, exactly? Scathach stood next to him, her clothes much less obviously other, she was wearing a comfortable pair of jeans, and a cardigan on top of a black shirt. Archer has been teaching you how to fight, and he's been helping you develop agility and stamina, she started, crossing her arms, but you lack in core strength. You may have the technique necessary to strike without hurting yourself, but you lack the power to make those hits count. She nodded towards the trash heap. For that reason, and with Inko-san's approval, I've arranged to have you clean this place in the next couple of years. Izuku swallowed. The entire beach? Scathach nodded, before handing him a pair of gloves. Here, so you don't hurt yourself. Now get to it, she continued, crossing her arms again, and trust that I won't be attacking you while you work out. Izuku sighed. This was going to be a long project. The first week was exhausting. Izuku felt like he could barely move, like his muscles were made of jelly. But, slowly yet surely, some results started to show themselves. While at first he struggled to move some of the smaller pieces, such as microwaves and trash bags, he started to build muscle mass, and thus started to move on to tackling bigger and bigger pieces of junk, such as tires and bigger pieces of electronics. He worked out a routine with Scathach, Solomon and Gilgamesh, so that he could work out and recover as necessary, and still keep up with his studies. A routine that went unbroken for almost an entire year, before something unusual happened. Izuku woke up, and for the first time, his room was empty. No Tuya, who was probably already up, but most importantly no servants. Weird. Still, that was no reason to change his routine. Izuku got up, did his usual stretching and some light warm-ups, before going to get washed and dressed. Then, once he was fully dressed, he walked downstairs to have breakfast, only to step into an unusual scene. His mother, who had always cooked every meal in his life, was sitting at the table, a confused expression on her face. Mom? Inko turned towards her son, still clearly and utterly stunned. Morning, Izuku-kun, she paused, fiddling with a piece of cloth, who's the man in the kitchen? Izuku blinked, and stepped further into the room, until his eyes finally caught a glimpse of the person Inko was referring to. It was a tall man, wearing some black pants and a black shirt. A red coat was laid on top of a chair, and Izuku could faintly see the laces of an apron wrapped around the man's waist. His hair was entirely white, blown back as if he'd just come in after being in the wind for a while, and his skin was tanned. Izuku felt the unmistakable connection flowing from his command spells. That had to be a servant, then. Just then, the man turned, a sour expression on his face. Ah, so you're awake. Good, he continued, turning back to the kitchen, from where Izuku could just now notice a heavenly smell coming from. Go sit. We'll have to talk later. Izuku blinked and, too surprised to object, he walked back to the living room, and sat down next to his mother. Tuya? She shook her head. He's at that internship, remember? Izuku nodded. Right, Tuya had gone on his first internship, slightly later than most hero schools did them, but apparently Ketsubutsu wanted to ensure that their students had the basics down pat. Before Izuku could add anything, however, the man walked back in the room, balancing a couple of plates on his arms and placing them down in front of Izuku and his mother. The plates contained a balanced meal for the start of the day, with eggs, rice and some lighter vegetables. Immediately afterwards, the man produced a couple of glasses, setting them down before heading back to the kitchen, only to return with a bottle of water. Eat, before it gets cold. You'll need the strength. Izuku and Inko nodded, startled, before clapping their hands. Thanks for the meal. The food was divine. Nothing Izuku had ever eaten before could compare, except, maybe, his mom's katsudon. This is amazing. The man closed his eyes, as a small smile appeared on his face. Good, I'm glad that my time in the throne hasn't dulled my skills. He went back into the kitchen, and came back with his red coat back on, sitting down right in front of Izuku. So, Master, he started, leaning on his hand, you want to become a hero? Izuku finished chewing his last bite, swallowed it, and nodded. More than anything else in my life. The man sighed, closing his eyes. What is it with you kids, always wanting to be heroes of justice without even knowing what that entails? Actually, Izuku interrupted him before he could continue, I think I know what it means. Oh? Do you now? Izuku nodded. Yes. It's a thankless job, it's a lot of effort, and it's hard. I know that a lot of the other people in this line of work will be in it only for the money or the fame. Izuku clenched his hand, his mind wandering back to what Tuya had told them, but I don't care about what I have to sacrifice, if it means I can save other people. He stared straight into the man's amber eyes. I will be a hero capable of saving everyone around me, and if I can't do it off my own strength, he lifted his hand, showing his spells, then I'll do it employing the strength of those who follow me. No one will have to suffer, because I will be there. The man looked straight into his eyes for a second, as if judging his resolve, before sighing and sitting back straight. Fine, if that's the case, then I have no choice but to accept you and ensure you eat well enough not to kill yourself in the line of work. I, he continued, standing back up, am an archer-class servant. You may call me Amiya, Master. Explaining Amiya to Tuya, once he came back, would have been rather funny, if not for the fact that his brother looked genuinely upset. What's wrong, Tuya? Izuku had laid down with his head on Tuya's thigh, and he could feel that his brother's body temperature was slightly higher than usual, a sign of his irritation. During my internship we've been investigating some strings of human trafficking, Izuku gasped at that, but Tuya continued, and while our trail's gone cold, we've ran into some evidence for a very young kid vanishing. She's less than 2 years old, her parents have completely disappeared, but it seems like a quirk was used on them. Tuya paused, sighing. All our signs pointed us towards Shibuya, but that's where our trail went cold. I'm very worried about this. Something within Izuku's consciousness stirred, barely perceivable. I hope she gets found soon, Tuya. Tuya nodded, taking in a deep breath before turning to beam at his brother. But enough about me. How's the trash heap coming along? Izuku groaned. The Midoriya household's doorbell rang. Coming. Solomon opened the door, and when he looked down, he frowned. What are you doing here? A little girl in a red dress was standing at the door, with an even smaller kid in her arms. Whatever I want, as usual, Grand Caster. I assume I can entrust you with informing Eraserhead of this? Solomon rubbed a hand on his face, before leaning down to pluck the kid from the girl's arms. Sure. Just don't make life any more difficult for our master, would you? The girl smiled. I wouldn't dare of it. After all, she crossed her arms, a cocky expression on her face, he's almost as fun as they were, all those years ago. Solomon nodded, trusting her on this. One last thing, before I go, she stopped before leaving, her quirk some kind of temporal rewind. It's extremely powerful, to the point of erasing people from existence. Be careful with her. What's her name? The girl moved a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. Those men called her Eri. I don't think she has a last name. And with that, she started to walk away. Wait a second. The girl stopped. Didn't you have a cup? She shrugged. I don't need it anymore. It's safe where it is, anyways. And with that, the girl walked away, waving at Solomon. Shoyuta knew that the Midoriya family would be an entire headache for him, but he didn't expect them to be this bad for his stress levels. I'll go through this once again, just to make sure. Izuku was sitting next to Solomon, holding the sleeping form of Eri, while Inko was, with Tuya, standing right behind them. Tuya's eyes hadn't gone away from the girl for more than a second. A stray servant, who recognized Izuku as her master, knocked at the door while Solomon was summoned, handed him Eri. He was clearly struggling to keep his voice low, as to not wake up the girl, and then left, without identifying herself. Solomon nodded. But I can't keep more than one servant summoned. I'd know, Izuku interrupted them, still keeping his voice low. Gilgamesh-san had me try in a bunch of different ways. Shoyuta sighed, rubbing one hand across his face in frustration. Izuku-kun, please try and keep your quirk under a tighter leash? Izuku nodded at Shuta's request. I'll try, Shoji-san. That froze the room. Izuku blinked, then stood up, gently placing Eri back in Solomon's arms, and walked back into his room, from where came a very muffled scream. I have to tell Tomo-chan that she owes me money. Inko's words broke the silence, making Shoyuta sigh again as he stood up. I'll settle this matter with the police. Let my nephew know that, he continued, addressing both Inko and Solomon, and let me know if anything comes up about this stray servant, all right? They nodded, and Inko walked him to the door. And thus, the Midoriya household's life changed again. Fitting Eri in their day-to-day life wasn't that hard, rather, the most worrisome part was whether her quirk would activate at some inconvenient time. Luckily for them all, no one had to be rewound back to being a baby. Tuya quickly became Eri's favorite brother, something that Izuku would have been jealous about if not for the fact that Tuya was his favorite brother too. It wasn't uncommon, especially during vacation PRDS, to see the three siblings napping together on the couch or on a bed, with Izuku and Eri nestled on top of Tuya to fully capitalize on his higher body temperature. Amiya fit in the family dynamic quite nicely, allowing Inko to have more time for herself, as he enjoyed doing chores and cooking. That, of course, meant that Inko had more time to spend with her children, as well as on her own hobbies, such as knitting and coding. Izuku got it in his head that he needed to learn how to cook, and Amiya enjoyed having an assistant that wouldn't try to cook his food on his quirk, with this being the reason why Tuya was banned from the Midoriya kitchen. Rumi took to dropping by every now and then, with the excuse of helping Tuya with homework, when she actually spent most of her time sparring with this or that one of Izuku's heroic spirits. Hawks dropped by far less, but whenever he did, he looked weary and exhausted, which meant that Izuku and Tuya had an excuse to preen his feathers and let him nap somewhere. Eri started to toddle, and then walk, and then speak. It was barely anything more than small words and sounds, but when she called Inko Mom, the whole neighborhood risked flooding because of the family's tears. The safety concerns around Izuku's kidnapping attempt slowly dropped, since it seemed that whoever had tried it had lost interest, or picked an easier target. The darkness surrounding Izuku in his dreams had slowly started to dissipate, he noticed one night. He still couldn't properly make out the building around him, but now he knew he was in a large open space, instead of having no idea at all of his bearings. I'm glad to see that little Eri is being taken care of. Coccinnia's voice rang out, loud and clear, from her place up above. Izuku could now clearly make out her shape, and vaguely make out some details of her armor and cloak, although her head was still entirely hidden in the darkness. And would I be correct, Coccinnia-san? Izuku asked, a soft smile on his face, in assuming that you know how she came to our door? The servant chuckled. See, Praetor, that's why I like you. You're smarter than most. Izuku bowed deeply at the waist. Thank you for rescuing my sister, Coccinnia-san. He heard her wave before she'd even spoken. It wasn't an issue at all, Praetor. I'd heard your brother complain about her situation. As he stood back up, he saw her cross her legs, and thus I had no choice but to right this wrong. Rather, there's a different reason as for why I've summoned you here. Izuku frowned, confused. And what would that be, Coccinnia-san? She leant on one armrest of her throne. Soon, you'll gain access to far greater power. She paused, almost as if savoring her own words, enough to finally put you at the proper start of your path as a hero. Others will fill this empty theater, and more servants will be at your side in battle. Izuku stood still, quietly absorbing her words. When that happens, I'll let you grasp a fragment of your truest power, my Praetor. Cherish it, and use it in your ascent to the stars. As the darkness enveloped him once more, Izuku had a sort of vision, a massive tower, spanning from the depths of the earth all the way up to the moon, a moon where someone was offering a hand to a girl who just wanted to die. And thus, Izuku's last year of middle school began. It began with an accident that would forever change the course of his life, something that perhaps only 3 of his servants were truly aware of, 3 servants and a mage locked up at the edge of the world. It all began when, finally, the Dagoba beach returned to its pristine state. Izuku collapsed onto the sand, exhausted. Well done, master. Scathach approached him, handing him a water bottle, which Izuku gratefully took and started to sip from. You fully cleaned the beach, and it took you 1 less year than I expected. I can easily say that we're all incredibly proud of you. Izuku smiled at her, finally sitting back up with a groan. If I manage to walk tomorrow, he started, wiping some sweat off his brow, I'm sure I'll be extremely grateful for this training, Scathach-san. She patted his head, smiling. I'll go back to the throne, for now, as to not further drain your limited energy. Head back home and rest, alright? Izuku gave her a mock salute, and then she vanished. The walk back home was quiet. The sun was slowly setting, and its warmth still lingered, a sign of the slowly approaching summer. As Izuku walked through the underpass, his mind didn't register the weird noise of sewage, nor the smell, as his exhaustion was overwhelming him. Rather, the only thing that he did notice was when, suddenly, a manhole cover popped up, and something enveloped him. A weird sludge was covering him from head to toe, filling his nostrils, his mouth, his ears. He couldn't breathe, he couldn't scream, he could barely hear the roaring laughter of the monster that was enveloping him. Ah, thanks kid, the villain laughed, I was about to be caught by All Might, but the universe gave me a nice meat bag to hide in. Don't worry, you'll just choke for a moment, and then you won't feel a thing anymore. Izuku heard rumbling below him, but he couldn't move or speak. His vision was getting dotty, as his lungs desperately tried to fill themselves up with air. His dream would finish before it even started? The command spells burnt again, for the third time under the same underpass, and suddenly the sludge was split open, allowing Izuku to fall to the ground, free to hack out what had remained in his mouth and to breathe again. What the dash? You thought a little bit of sludge could stop one who has authority over the waters? Don't make mother laugh. When Izuku finally managed to look up, he was surprised by what he was seeing. In front of him was floating a young girl wearing a large sweater, the same color of the night sky, paired with an equally long and equally colored scarf. Her light blue hair flowed like water, only parted on the sides by two large horns that curved down, as if to form two mirrored B shapes. The girl's eyes sparkled for a moment, and immediately afterwards, the villain made of sludge was unceremoniously shoved in two large bottles that someone had tossed away. After closing the bottles, the girl knelt in front of Izuku, looking at him with concern in her red eyes. Are you all right, child? Izuku finished coughing out the sludge and, after regaining his breath, he spoke. I am, he paused, exhausted by the fatigue and by his near-death experience, but who are you? The girl smiled. I'm Mom, she paused, tapping her chin with one hand. No, that's wrong. That's my position. Let's try again. She cleared her throat before speaking again. My name is Tiamat, and I've come to you as an alter ego. As the mother of Genesis, I can't allow any of my children to die, so I've decided to come to your aid. Just then, a large figure hopped out of that same manhole from whence the sludge had come. I am here to handle the villain who has been trying to evade me. Izuku blinked. Then he slapped himself. Then he fainted. Someone was slapping him, and someone else was yelling. Stop slapping my child, you brute. Ma'am, it's procedure, please let me do my job. Izuku slowly opened his eyes, fatigue still weighing them closed. I had the weirdest dream. I almost died, and then someone who called herself Mom saved me, and then All Might showed up. As he sat up, Izuku made two realizations. Firstly, he was still in the underpass, and secondly, that wasn't a dream. All Might? Indeed, young man. Your bravery in resisting the villain's assault is what allowed me to get to him. Although, he paused, rubbing a part of his left side, I should warn you that using your quirk this freely isn't really smart, in today's political climate. Izuku blinked, and bowed. I'm sorry All Might, sir, but my quirk is weirdly sentient. The throne does what it wants. But, before Izuku could explain himself further, All Might started coughing and, after a second, a cloud of smoke covered him. All Might. When the smoke had dissipated, Izuku and Tiamat's eyes got to see an emaciated man in place of the larger-than-life figure that belonged to All Might. Please don't scream. Izuku swallowed. I don't think I can, honestly. Is there anything I can do to help you, All Might? The man chuckled. Ah, don't worry young man. This, unfortunately, is just how I have to live nowadays. Izuku nodded, panic flooding every single one of his nerves, before snapping back to his senses. Tiamat-san. The servant stood at attention. Yes, my child? Could you please head right home and warn Mom that I'm bringing a wounded person? Tiamat frowned. But I'm your mother. Izuku sighed. Please? Tiamat relented, giving a faux pout. Fine, fine. But if you're not home in 10 minutes, I'm coming to look for you. As soon as Tiamat was out of sight, Izuku picked up his phone and quickly dialed a familiar number. Uncle? Hi, it's Izuku. Shoyuta felt the gray hair multiplying on his head. That's it, you're moving to UA. Izuku nodded, his still damp hair moving with a lot more weight after the shower. I'd like to disagree, but if twice is a coincidence, 3 times is a conspiracy. The villain was still struggling in the tightly sealed bottles that All Might, or rather, Toshinori Yagi, was still holding in a bag, although his current focus was on breathing normally while his future colleague, Eraserhead, rebandaged his wound. And you, Yagi, said colleague addressed him, didn't Chio tell you to take it easier? Or Nizu, for that matter? Yagi looked dejected enough that Shoyuta sighed, tightening slightly the bandages. There. No more heroics until you get a proper look from Chio, you hear me? He nodded. Thank you, Aizawa-kun, he did a half bow, wincing in pain, and thank you too, young man. Izuku weakly waved his hands. Ah, it's no problem, sir. I'm just doing what any hero would do. Yagi looked at him, curiosity swimming in his eyes. So I take it you're planning to enroll at UA for next year? Izuku shrugged, leaning back against the couch, where Tiamat got back to drying his hair with a towel. Assuming I pass the entrance exam, yes. I've been training for that my whole life. He picked at his lower lip while talking, and I've just finished clearing up Dagobah to prepare, so I'll still need to figure out something else to do to build up some more muscle, especially since Scathach-san said I'm still a bit on the scrawnier side. Wait, Dagobah? The trash heap? Izuku nodded, his eyes snapping back to All Might's form. Yes sir. One of my retainers ordered me to do so to build core strength, and so I did. It took me just over 2 years, and I'm very proud of that work. Yagi rubbed his chin, deep in thought. You're not thinking what I'm sure you're thinking, are you? Shura's words snapped him out of his thoughts. He's perfect, Aizawa-kun. And we both know that the principal approves. With a terrifying timing, both of their phones pinged at that moment, a message from the principal, echoing Yagi's words. Shoyuta groaned. I would quit, but Nizu would figure out a way to rehire me without my consent. Izuku was just about to ask what this entire conversation was about, but Inko beat him to it. What are you planning to make my boy do? Yagi turned towards Inko, bowed as deeply as he could, and then he started to explain. You see, ma'am, there's a certain secret in regards to my quirk that you need to know. Izuku was dumbfounded. His mother was sitting next to him, equally confused. A transferable quirk? Yagi nodded. Shoyuta had already left to bring the villain into police custody, leaving him alone to handle this entire matter. Indeed, my boy. One for All is a transferable power that's existed ever since the dawn of Quirks, passed from hero to hero for generations, with its only purpose being defeating the greatest evil of mankind, all for one. Tiamat hummed. It kinda sounds like a grand servant in and of itself. Izuku blinked. What? A grand servant? You see, she began, floating to the side to take a seat of her own. Every now and then, someone's love for humanity grows too much, to the point of being corrupted and turned into hate. Those people are called beasts, or evils of humanity, and Alea ends up summoning grand servants to dispatch them. I see, Izuku hummed, jotting down notes on a notebook, but what is a grand servant? Tiamat put a hand to her chin thoughtfully. The pinnacle of their class, to make it easy. They're the best of the best, the complete incarnation of what it means to be of a certain class. For example, she waved her hand, producing a bit of mud that quickly shaped itself in a cloaked figure with a skull mask. The Grand Assassin used to be the founder of the Order of the Hassans, the Old Man of the Mountain, Hassan-I Sabah. The reason for this role was that he was the greatest assassin to ever live, unparalleled in every regard. Izuku nodded, taking notes. All Might, I appreciate you sharing this secret with us, he continued, turning back towards his hero, but why would you tell us? The man scratched his head. Isn't it obvious, young man? You're calm in the face of danger, the skill with which you took the reins of the situation, the way you handled it all. He counted those attributes on his hand. These are all traits that the upper echelon of heroes must have in order to save as many people as possible. Thus, he stood up, looking straight at Izuku. Young man, would you want to be my successor, and to inherit One for All? Izuku blinked. Then he did so again. Then he pinched himself. I'm awake. I'm awake, All Might is offering me his quirk and to be his successor. Yagi chuckled at that. So, I take it that's a yes? Izuku nodded, afraid that words might fail him. Very well. Then tomorrow I'd ask that you come to UA at your earliest convenience, so that we may run a full physical to understand your current baseline state. Izuku sat in the hallway as he quietly waited for his results, his uncle sitting by his side. When you get in, Shoyuta began, a weary tone in his voice, you'll have to live on campus. It will probably be a good enough chance for the principal to institute the dorms he's always wanted to set up, too, so you won't have much of a choice. Izuku frowned, confusion clear on his face. Don't you mean if, Shoji-san? Shoyuta shook his head. Even if we weren't all aware of your capabilities, he started, making Izuku blush at the veiled praise, you're very likely going to get All Might's quirk. And Nizu would never risk you getting anything less than the best education possible. The infirmary door opened just then, interrupting their conversation as Recovery Girl walked out. We've finished reviewing your results, Midoriya-kun. If you'd kindly follow me inside. Izuku jumped to his feet, followed by Shoyuta, and the two walked in the infirmary, where a woman in what looked like a red army uniform was standing with a folder in her hands. Berserker-san, is everything okay? The woman nodded, smiling at her master as she moved her braided brown hair behind her shoulders. Everything is perfect, master. She gestured for the two to sit, which they did. Recovery Girl-san has a perfect medical etiquette, and I really appreciated being able to familiarize myself with what modern medicine has to offer. She paused at that, glancing at Yagi's shrunk form as he sat on a chair and frowning. Now, if only we could ask for more specialized help to fix All Might's failing organs. The man in question waved his hands, a sad smile on his face. I appreciate your intention, young lady, he started, leaning back in his chair with a slight wince, but we've done everything modern medicine could think of. This is just the way my life is, unless you've got some weird magic to fix it. Berserker shook her head. No, I do not. Some of our casters, however. We'll see what we can do when I manage to summon them, Izuku interrupted her musings, Nightingale-san. Could we focus on my results for a moment? The Angel of Crimea nodded, stepping back as Recovery Girl took a seat. Well, young man, the older nurse began, your current physical condition is what I describe as the highest form you could possibly achieve with your current training regimen. Your body is in perfect condition, your muscle mass seems more than sufficient to HRNSS 1 for all's power. Chio paused, fixing her glasses on her face. However, I have reason to believe that you may not be able to fully utilize the new Quirk's strength. She paused for a second, humming thoughtfully, at least not in its entirety. Izuku frowned. What do you mean, ma'am? Chio waved at Nightingale, who pulled out a whiteboard and dragged it closer. One for All is a well of power that functions essentially as an emitter-type amplification quirk, Recovery Girl began, standing up and starting to scribble on the board with a Sharpie, which means that it boosts its user's physical capabilities, and it strengthens the original quirk it interacts with. Izuku nodded, a notebook already in his hand to take notes. We have no reason to believe that One for All might interact negatively with your Holy Grail, but rather we believe that the former's ability to be transferred from one user to the next may have made it so strong that trying to use its fullest potential might just shatter your body. Izuku swallowed, feeling a rivulet of fear dripping down his back. What level of shattering are we talking about? Recovery Girl shook her head. We can't say for sure, but our best hypothesis is that your bones will be powder. And that's the best-case scenario, Nightingale continued, her tone surprisingly calm, as the worst-case scenario may be your limbs literally shooting away from your torso. If the previous hypothesis had made Izuku tremble in fear, after hearing the worst-case scenario Izuku paled, sinking further into his chair. I see. He took another deep breath, mildly terrifying, but at least it gives us a path to follow. If I can't use the quirk's fullest power, I just need to figure out a scale to balance myself out and not break every single bone in my body. Recovery Girl nodded. That's a solid plan, young man, although it has a very thin margin of error. Izuku nodded, determination etched in every line on his face. Just like most acts of heroism. Chio sighed. Very well, if you're aware of the risks and still want to go on with this, I won't stop you. Nightingale nodded at her statement, after which Izuku got up from his chair and bowed. Thank you very much for your assistance, ma'am, Berserker-san. Now, he turned towards All Might, when can we proceed with the transfer? The sooner I get One for All, the sooner I can start figuring out my limits. Yagi stood up from his own chair, bulking back up to his All Might form. Very well, young man. If that's the case, he plucked a single hair from his head, holding it out for Izuku to grab. Eat this. Izuku shuddered, still mildly disgusted. Was there really no better way? Yagi shook his head, an apologetic expression on his face. I'm afraid not, I'm sorry young Midoriya. The only way to pass it on, he continued, twiddling his thumbs, is for some of my DNA to enter your body, and this felt like the least disgusting way. Fighting against the urge to GG, Izuku took in his surroundings. The large building they'd entered had brought them to what looked like a massive, partially damaged cityscape, that seemed to mimic some of the busiest parts of Tokyo down to the tiniest details. Where are we? Shoyuta was the last one to enter, followed by Recovery Girl. This is Training Ground Gamma, one of UA's facilities created to train our students. Considering your, Eraserhead paused, fixing his scarf to hide his mild discomfort, unique circumstances, our principal has seen fit to offer you a place to first test how One for All interacts with your body and with your quirk. Izuku nodded, it was, after all, the smartest course of action. I see. I don't know how smart it would be to start with the physical portion, he began, pinching his lower lip between his fingers as he thought out loud, since, if I got injured, it would make me unable to test Holy Grail's evolution. Izuku swirled around, facing his uncle, the nurse and All Might once again. Therefore, it'd be best if I started by testing out Holy Grail, and then moved on to the physical portion afterwards. Shoyuta nodded, clearly proud of his nephew's analysis, while All Might and Chio looked slightly dumbfounded by his thought process. Izuku turned back to the city, taking a couple of steps forwards and taking a stance, before Eraserhead spoke again. What are you testing first, Izuku-kun? Izuku flinched, already hyperfocused, and almost fell on his butt while turning around. Oh. Right, he fanned himself, blushing in slight embarrassment. I'd like to start by checking the new limits of my summoning capabilities, so numbers, precision, and energy drain. Then I'll move on to testing the magical circuits theory. All Might frowned in confusion. Magical what now? Shoyuta waved him off. I'll explain later, just know that the problem child's quirk is probably more of a headache than your own, and then, to Izuku, alright Izuku-kun, start when you feel ready. To which his nephew nodded and turned back to the city, taking a wide stance with his left hand pointed forwards. Let's start with precision. I want to call forth a servant I've already summoned before. Izuku took a deep breath, letting his mind wander back to the basics that Solomon had taught him. Summoning a servant, back during the old Grail Wars, required a chant, a catalyst, and a summoning circle. In Izuku's case, none of these components were requirements, as the servants could come into the world of their own volition as long as he was around to act as an anchor, but the chant could be used as a rod to pull them in. My will creates your body, and your sword creates my destiny. If you heed the Grail's call, blue light started swirling around Izuku's feet, and abide by this will and reason, then answer me. Izuku opened his eyes, hand still stretched out, as his command spells started glowing faintly. I hereby swear. I embody all that is good in the world. I shall defeat all that is evil in the world. Seventh heaven clad in the 3 words of power. Come forth from the circle of binding, the light grew to the point of being blinding, as a distinct pressure weighed on the 3 onlookers, guardian of the scales. When the light finally dissipated, and Izuku's eyes had recovered from the blinding flash, Tiamat was rushing towards him, worry clearly etched on every inch of her face. Oh, my child. Are you alright? Mom, I'm Dash. You're not hurt, are you? Mom Dash. I felt such a weird sensation from you, and your mother was worried, and Dash. Mom. I'm fine. Tiamat took a moment to give him a once-over, grabbing his face to stare deep into his eyes, before nodding, seemingly satisfied. Good. I'm glad to hear that. She floated slightly back, giving Izuku some much-needed personal space, and you seem much stronger. Has the transfer happened already? Izuku nodded, whipping out a notebook to jot down his observations. Yep, and now that One for All is integrating with Holy Grail, it seems I can more easily call for any specific servant I've ever summoned, rather than just blindly tossing my rod into the throne to pull whoever bites the bait. Tiamat leaned over his shoulders, reading his notes. It did feel differently from the first time you called for me, she mused, crossing her arms, although I can't say if the difference lies with your new power or with the circumstances. I should ask Jean, since her summoning was in a calmer moment. Izuku wrote that down as he said it, before nodding. All right. He started to speak again, this time at a higher tone of voice to be heard by All Might, Shoyuta and Recovery Girl as well. Now I'll try for a less specific summoning. The idea is calling for a servant that can do one specific thing, even if I've never met anyone like that. Tiamat nodded, floating back to give Izuku space. Any specifics you'd like to go for? Izuku stashed the notebook back in one of his pockets as he thought, before nodding. Yes. Since I still need to see how One for All behaves on its own, I might need a servant capable of fixing major injuries, so that's what I'll go for. After taking another deep breath, Izuku started the chant once more. However, something different happened. His words started slow and well enunciated, only to become faster and faster, still clearly pronounced, but so quickly as to become almost unintelligible to his onlookers. In much the same way, the light grew brighter at a faster pace, and vanished just as quickly, leaving a young girl standing in front of them. Her long, lilac hair was tied in a ponytail, and it cascaded on a dress that spanned the various colors of the sea. She held onto a complicated staff, the top of which was composed by some circles, as well as 2 snakes wrapped around the staff. I'm Midoriya, a caster-class servant. I look forward to working with you, she gracefully bowed, Master. Izuku bowed back, much more stiffly. Thank you for answering my summons, Midoriya-san. Now, he took his notebook back in his hands, clicking his pen as he talked. I'm mildly familiar with your legend, but would you mind telling us what you can do? The girl nodded, a serious expression on her face. Of course. I assume you've called upon me to fight by your side, but, she went to rub her head, as her cheeks reddened, I'm not much of a fighter, if I'm being honest. She paused, tapping gently the ground with her staff. But, while I might not be that knowledgeable about offensive spells, I can heal about anything. As long as someone's alive, I'll put them back together. Izuku quickly jotted down notes as she spoke, humming to himself. I see, then the summoning was a resounding success. Thank you, he bowed again to his newest caster, Midoriya-san, I'll be in your care. That made her giggle. Shouldn't that be my line, Master? A cough interrupted them, as Shoyuta hid his mouth in his scarf. If you kids are done flirting, that made them both blush, shouldn't we be testing other stuff? Izuku was the first one to snap back from his stunned state, leaving Midoriya blushing on her own. Oh, right. The magical circuits theory. With that, he took a few steps towards the city, and took another stance, pulling his right arm back as if he'd grabbed something he was preparing to throw. What is he doing? I thought he wanted to test something about circuitry, not. All Might gestured at what Izuku was doing, whatever that is. Shoyuta nodded. Indeed, that is what he's doing. Long story made extremely short, he crossed his arms, watching as Izuku's first started faintly glowing red. The problem child and one of his servants have theorized that the nature of his quirk might also allow him to use magecraft, or at least that's what they called it. As soon as he finished speaking, Izuku stuck one finger out and pointed towards one of the buildings, shooting what looked like a red bullet towards the concrete, shattering it instantly. Well, I'll be. Solomon owes me some money. Tiamat chuckled at that, having finished checking up on Midoriya, who'd stopped blushing and was now checking that Izuku's output of magical energy hadn't wounded him in any way. So, Shoyuta started, barely hiding his shock at what he'd seen. I guess the test's a success? Izuku whirled around to look at his uncle, nodding excitedly. Yes. Although, he paused, thinking back to the rune incident, I think this may just be another way in which one for all enhanced Holy Grail. Would you be so kind as to explain? Recovery Girl questioned, approaching the group. Midoriya-kun? Izuku nodded. A while back, I'd been studying magecraft theory with Solomon-san, and he made me trace a bunch of runic patterns so that I could learn what they did and what they looked like. He had sat down at this point, and he was using his pencil to scribble the Ansuz rune on the ground. However, just as I was tracing the Ansuz rune, as soon as he finished writing it down, a small burst of fire exploded from it. This happened. A second passed, during which no one spoke, before Yagi coughed up blood. So, he paused, wiping the blood away. Exactly how many types of? He trailed off, leaving the question unfinished, but Izuku hummed, as if he'd already understood. I'm not sure, but I could ask? He turned towards Tiamat. Mom, would you mind going back to the throne for a bit, so I can call Solomon? Don't you want to test how many servants you can summon? Izuku shook his head at his alter ego's question. That sounds like a great way to be out of energy if something bad happens during the physical portion. I'll have plenty of time to test that limit on my own. He paused, checking his spells, and we already know the important part. One for all lets me summon more servants than before. Tiamat sighed, before nodding. I don't like leaving my children alone, but I understand your reasoning. Still, call if anything happens, all right? Izuku nodded, before the petite woman hugged him and vanished in a faint golden light. Exactly as he'd done before, Izuku took his summoning stance, with the words flowing out of him so quickly, no one could understand them, and once again, in a flash of blue light, the form of Solomon had materialized in front of the group. Izuku-kun? Did you need something? The man knelt down to be at the same height as Izuku's face. Hi, Solomon-san, he paused, pointing at the scorch mark on the floor and at the collapsed building. You owe me money. Solomon looked at the scorch mark, then turned to look at the shattered concrete, and then he sighed. So the magical circuits theory is correct, huh? Izuku just beamed. And I assume you want to know how many types of magecraft you can use? Midoriya huffed, crossing her arms. So you truly did have a high level of clairvoyance, she muttered, sounding somewhat petulant. Grand Caster? Solomon smiled awkwardly, rubbing his neck. Ah, none of that, please, Midoriya-san. You know I left behind my title. She sighed again, although this time it sounded almost wistful. Wait, you used to be a grand? Solomon blinked at Izuku's question, but before he could answer it, Izuku waved with his hand. One question at a time, this isn't relevant. Magic first. You mean magecraft, but yes, that's less relevant. All Might spoke, confused. Is there a difference between magic and magecraft? Solomon looked up at the emaciated man. Ah, Yagi-san. Well, yes, there is a rather large difference. You see, he waved his hand, materializing a whiteboard and starting to write on it. You could consider magecraft a copy of actual magic. It's usually less powerful and less dangerous, but it also consumes less magical energy for its user. But, Izuku interrupted, at times, a fake can be just as good as the original, right? Solomon nodded, smiling at his pupil. I see Amiya-san has been teaching you. Izuku giggled at that. Anyways, we're straying away from the topic. As for how many types of magecraft you can use, he paused, touching Izuku's head for a moment, I think that you can, theoretically, use them all. It's just a matter of mastering them, and figuring out for which one you've got a greater affinity. Satisfied with the results, Izuku finished jotting down a couple more notes before closing his notebook and handing it to Solomon. "Thank you for your assistance, Solomon-san. Would you mind keeping this safe for a minute?" The former Grand Caster nodded, stashing the notebook away in his robes, before taking a couple of steps back, as Izuku addressed All Might once again. "Now we'll move on to the practical part," he paused, rolling up his sleeves, "so I'd really appreciate knowing how to activate One for All consciously, if you could help me." Everything felt faint around him. It was as if he'd been run over by a train carrying a dozen cruise ships, every single one of his bones hurt terribly, and yet he couldn't so much as move an inch. Then, a familiar voice rang out. "Reversion spell, ready." Izuku felt something drain out of him, before the voice started speaking again. "This is the blueprint of my soul. Through my life, I command restoration, recurrence and reversion." He felt something warm engulf him, as if he was being embraced by a warm soup, pain breaker. As if the pain had never been there, Izuku took a sharp breath, finally opening his eyes to meet the worried gaze of his servants. "Thank you, Midoriya-san," Solomon started, sitting on the ground next to his master, "for your prompt intervention." The younger caster just nodded, wiping some sweat off her brow before following suit and sitting down as well. Slowly, Izuku sat up, only now realizing that he was lying on his back. His clothes were ripped around his arms, and his hands were slightly red, as if he'd just barely recovered from some grievous wound. Then, as he looked up, he saw what looked like a crater, and everything rushed back to him. "So," he started, swallowing loudly, "I guess that 100% is off the table for a while." Shoyuta sighed in relief. "I'm glad that you're feeling well enough to make jokes, problem child." He ruffled his hair, "considering that you shattered every single bone in your upper body by punching." Izuku turned towards his teachers, astonishment clear in every line of his face. "I what?" All Might bowed deeply as he could, with his injury, clearly apologetic. "I'm sorry, my boy," he stammered, clearly embarrassed by his advice. "I didn't have any trouble using the quirk at its fullest potential when I first got it, so I assumed." Izuku slowly got up, as Midoriya quickly rushed up to help him stand in case he wasn't stable, before approaching All Might. "It's fine, Yagi-san. You had no way of knowing, and we'd taken every possible precaution so that we could face these issues if they happened. Besides," he smiled, bright as the sun, "it wouldn't be as fun to start with a full cheat sheet. I want to crack this quirk wide open on my own." All Might sighed in relief, standing back up and smiling at Izuku. "I'm glad you're taking it that well, Midoriya-kun." "Indeed," continued Shoyuta, who had just crossed his arms as he thought, "I'll text your mother to schedule more frequent training here at UA. You need to get One for All under control before the entrance exam." Izuku nodded, a determined expression on his face, before Solomon interrupted his vibe by ruffling his hair. "And we'll ensure that the Magecraft component, as well as the Servant One, are fully under control at home." "Hey, wake up." Izuku stirred slightly, turning on his other side and covering his head with his bedsheets. "You'll be late if you don't get up." Couldn't whoever it was just leave him sleep a bit longer? He was always early anyways, so it's not like sleeping a couple more minutes would actually make him that late. "Get up, you dimwit, you have to go take your exam." The sheets were rudely ripped off his body, and with that movement, a sharp cold fully woke him up. Izuku turned towards Jean Alter, pinning her with a glare. "What? You told me to wake you up like that. Tuya, your mom and Tiamat are waiting for you downstairs. Get moving." With that, the Avenger in black armor walked out of the room, and Izuku, with a groan, dragged himself out of bed. These last few months had flown like weeks, and yet at the same time they felt like years had passed. Izuku found himself musing while he took a quick shower. The training with All Might at UA helped him put One for All under a sliver of control, which meant that he now could use about 5% of it, so long as he spread it throughout his entire body and kept a solid enough leash on it. Its effects on Holy Grail, however, were still unclear. Izuku could summon more servants, yes, but his upper limit wasn't something he'd managed to experiment on, what with making sure he didn't shatter himself every time he used the physical aspect of his new quirk. "G'morning, Mom," he cheerfully saluted as he entered the kitchen, where Inko was still making breakfast. "Hi baby," she planted a quick kiss on his forehead as he stepped closer to help set up the table. "Tuya and Eri are in the living room, and Edmund-kun should be keeping an eye on them." Izuku nodded, smiling at her and heading towards the living room where, exactly as his mom had said, his siblings were sitting on the couch, with Eri pulling her best impression of a koala to climb on top of Tuya's shoulders, while Edmund was sitting at the table, pretending to read the newspaper while he anxiously kept an eye on Eri. "Such a softie," Izuku muttered, putting the cutlery down on the table and earning himself a quick, but heatless, glare from the count. I see you're in good spirits, Izuku-kun. Izuku nodded. I've done all I could to prepare. If the worst comes to pass, I'll just have to win the sports festival and transfer in from Gen Ed, so I see no reason to keep worrying so much. Edmund nodded approvingly. That's when Eri noticed her big brother, quickly tumbling down from Tuya's arms, and getting caught before any risk of harm could befall her by her eldest brother, before running towards Izuku. Ni-san. Izuku quickly swept her up, tossing her in the air and catching her. Hi Eri-chan. She'd grown so much, and with Eraser's help she'd gotten her quirk under control remarkably quickly. Izuku's heart swelled with pride every time he looked at her. Good luck with your exam today. Izuku smiled at her. Thank you. Can I get a kiss for good luck? He leaned closer, and she planted a quick kiss on his cheek, before giggling as he spun her around. Now I can't possibly fail. Thank you, Erine. The written part of the exam, it turns out, was not that hard, although part of it could have been that his studies with Solomon had him prepared way beyond his grade. Speaking of which, the caster leaned over to grab the paper once he'd stopped writing, and he quickly checked his answers. Some of the other students had been miffed when he'd entered the examination room with his servant, but the person supervising the exam, Snipe, had quieted them down by stating that it was part of Izuku's quirk. I think you've done a remarkable job, Izuku-kun. Izuku nodded with a smile, taking the paper back from Solomon's hands. They'd agreed he'd only correct his paper if there were major mistakes, and the fact that he hadn't written anything on it meant that there were none. Thank you, Solomon-san, Izuku muttered, before getting up and walking up to Snipe-sensei to hand him his completed exam. The easy part was done. Izuku took a calming breath as the practical part was explained to them. Robots. This validated his plan of action, he thought, as his shadow coalesced into the familiar form of Edmond Dantes by his side, in front of the gate. Nothing changes from what we'd planned, then? Izuku nodded. Indeed. The teachers know that any entities that aren't students are part of my quirk, so we'll be working together to clear out the robots and to make sure that no one gets hurt. One thing he was glad about was that they weren't in the same testing site as Bakugo. That would have probably been an explosive concoction, no pun intended, that would have ended badly for everyone involved. The blonde had only spared him a glance and a grunt before ignoring him, and Izuku was glad that it had gone that way. You, with the green hair. A tall boy with blue hair speedwalked towards Izuku, who flinched at the volume of his voice. Getting help from external sources is cheating. That is no behavior for an upcoming hero, and dash. Izuku held up his hand, cutting him off. I don't know who you are, but he's part of my quirk. Besides, if you want to scold me or rant, please do so at a lower volume. The other candidates are trying to focus. The blue-haired boy looked around, just now noticing the mix of glares and amused glances they were getting, and had the decency to appear embarrassed. Oh, you're right. In my haste to chastise what I felt to be uncouth behavior, I was the one who ended up being uncouth. I sincerely apologize. Then, after a deep bow, he continued, my name is Tenya Ida, and I wish you the best luck. Izuku smiled at him. He clearly had a good heart, even if he was a bit stiff. Izuku Midoriya, nice to meet you Ida-san, and likewise. I hope we both manage to get in. Ida was clearly about to say something else, when Present Mick's voice echoed across them. Go! The gates opened, and Izuku darted before his conscious mind had caught up with him, with Monte Cristo in tow. He faintly heard Mick's voice say something about countdowns, but he didn't pay it any mind in the whirlwind of battle. Robot scraps were flying everywhere, and as he kept destroying more with what little power of one for all he could use, he kept getting distracted by this or that other examiner that was about to be struck by the shrapnel, or to be stepped on by a robot they'd missed. His focus, too, was excessively single-minded, as the Ida boy had to save him from tripping on some scraps, a favor Izuku repaid by destroying a robot that was about to hit him on his head. In spite of it being an exam, Izuku was having fun. The robots were surprisingly squishy, which made him think that any modicum of training would have been enough to break them, and during his rampage he managed to spot access panels, which probably held cables that could be used to disable the robots. Then, a rumble broke his focus. As he turned around to see what was causing the fuss, he spotted it, a massive robot, towering over the entire testing area. The zero-pointer. Once again, Izuku found himself taking charge. Dantes was zipping around like a lightning bolt, removing rubble that had blocked alleys and directing the exam takers towards Izuku, who pointed them towards the exit. Ida joined them and once he saw what Izuku was doing, carrying the exam takers that were too tired to run, or those that had gotten hurt and couldn't run. Just as Izuku thought that everyone had gotten out, he heard someone's voice yelling in pain. He swiveled around, and he saw her, a girl with short brown hair. She'd been trapped under some rubble, and she couldn't seem to get out on her own. His body moved before he had any say in it, even as his mind whirred in action. Breaking the rubble would risk hurting her further, in the same way as trying to drag her out from under the rubble, which meant that the only option was to move the rock, but he didn't have time. The 0-pointer was almost upon her. Avenger. Dantes darted by Izuku's side as soon as the word had come out of his mouth, and the cloaked man jumped up in sync with his master, laughing maniacally. I follow a path beyond love and hate. One of Izuku's command spells drained out of him, and he felt time slow to a crawl. Multiple copies of Monte Cristo appeared, surrounding the robot's legs and charging what appeared to be some kind of energy beam, before the noble phantasm was released. Offer Chateau d'If. The beams all struck at the robot's legs, emitting a loud crackling sound as the energy bent and shattered pieces of metal. The robot started wobbling, leaning forwards, before Izuku's jump brought him exactly where he wanted to be, in front of the robot's face. His right arm ped back, Izuku activated his magic circuits as he let one for all flow through him, and with a yell, he punched. The sonic boom that erupted from his strike would be remembered for a while. Izuku found himself falling, as he noticed that the 0-pointer had been basically vaporized from the neck up, and that the impact had pushed it back, making it fall away from the girl instead of towards her. Then, he noticed a sharp pain from his arm. A quick check was enough to confirm that yes, it was broken, although luckily not as bad as he'd broken it the first time he'd used one for all. Finally, his mind grasped the fact that he was in free fall, with no idea of how to stop himself. Panic flooded his senses, only barely tempered by the pain. As he started trying to formulate a plan, watching the ground get closer and closer, Izuku felt himself slow down, right before getting slapped in the face, a painful sensation, but one that halted his fall just inches away from the ground. The girl was floating on a piece of rubble, holding her stomach with a pained expression, her other hand still extended from her slap. Once he'd gotten down enough, the girl deactivated her quirk, and both him and the rubble landed softly on the ground, immediately followed by the sound of the girl puking out her breakfast. Thank you for saving me," she muttered, cleaning her mouth with the back of her hand. I should be thanking you." Izuku was quick to answer, before his arm's pain stabbed him again. He flinched, using his left arm to sit up before quickly chanting. The girl was clearly about to ask him what he was doing, when the light blinded them both, before fading to reveal Midoriya standing next to them. "That was so reckless, Izuku-san. Wait until Tiamat-sama hears of this." The caster crouched next to him, and Izuku felt another wing of his command spells fade away. Pain Breaker. His arm instantly fixed itself, as if he'd never broken it, and out of the corner of his eye, Izuku noticed the girl sitting up straighter, as she rubbed her stomach with a confused expression. "It doesn't bother me anymore. Thank you, lady." She addressed Midoriya, who smiled at her, before turning back towards Izuku with an expression that was a mix of worry and anger. "Don't think that this means I'll let this slide, master." Izuku waved his hands in a placating manner, his single command spell glowing faintly red. "I know, Midoriya-san, but it was the only way. Don't tell Mom, please?" Midoriya pouted, looking away from his pleading face just in time to see Recovery Girl step closer. "Is the numbskull all right?" The caster nodded, just as Avenger hopped over the rubble to check on their master. "He appears to be unharmed, Recovery Girl, although I'm sure that's thanks to our Midoriya's efforts." Midoriya blushed, but didn't deny her involvement, as Recovery Girl walked closer to the girl, checking her over and giving her a clean bill of health. "I'm assuming you got involved in this one's Quirks mess, Missy," she spoke softly, handing her a bag of gummies, "so you should be fine, but I'd still suggest eating these to recover all your lost energy." The girl nodded, grabbing the gummies and slowly starting to eat them. "Thank you, ma'am." Similarly, she approached Izuku. "His teachings are rubbing off on you, Midoriya-kun." Izuku grimaced. "I promise I wasn't trying to get hurt?" Both Recovery Girl and Midoriya sighed at that, and Izuku knew, in his heart, that Edmund was hiding a smile in his cloak, the traitor. "Wait." Izuku turned around, flanked on both sides by his servants, to see the girl rushing towards him, with Ida in tow. "Oh, you're the girl from earlier. And Ida-san, right?" They nodded, apparently only now noticing that they had the same objective. "I wanted to thank you again for saving me, and," she fiddled with a phone, keeping her pinky fingers away from it, "well, I was hoping we could exchange contact info and keep in touch? I mean, even if we don't make it in, I'd really like to keep in touch with you." Ida butted in, cutting her off. "In much the same way, I was hoping to do the same. Midoriya-san. Your heroic spirit shone through brightly today, and I'd be honored to have you as a friend, or at least as an acquaintance to rely on." Izuku politely ignored Edmund's cough that suspiciously sounded like a laugh. Ida wouldn't understand why he was laughing, anyways, and he nodded, a soft smile lighting up his face. Sure. I'd love to keep in touch with you both, Ida-san, and? The girl blushed. Oh, right. I'm Achiko Uraraka, nice to meet ya. Izuku took her phone, punching in his number. Izuku Midoriya, and likewise. Be warned, I will bombard you with questions about your quirk. And you think I won't? Izuku stuck his tongue at her, earning himself a giggle, before grabbing Ida's phone to give him his contact. As he did so, he handed the two his own phone for them to insert their contact info. Why don't we make a group chat? It'll be easier to all keep in touch, regardless of our admission status. Izuku and Uraraka nodded, and the servants smiled between themselves. If Izuku hadn't had Uraraka-san and Ida-kun, Tuya thought, the kid would have driven them insane in his wait for the results. So, when the letter finally arrived, it was both a relief and slightly amusing to see Izuku trip over himself to rush to grab it. Quickly, the family had gathered around the table, a table that had become incredibly larger, since Nizu had bought out their lease and moved them into UA. That had been a bit shocking, considering that they woke up one morning to the movers waiting in front of their house, and extremely shocking when the entire move had been completed in less than 3 hours. Obviously, Inko, Tuya and Eri were there, sitting with Izuku as he fiddled with the letter. More surprising was the amount of servants that were standing there: Jean Alter, Solomon, Dantes, Amiya, Gilgamesh, Scathach, Tomo, Tiamat and Medea were all idly chatting, eating, or drinking something as they waited. The most impatient was, predictably, the King of Heroes, who ended up being the one to break the wait. If you don't open that letter, mongrel, he spoke, crossing his arms, I'll just toss it into my gate of Babylon, and be rid of it like that. Izuku squeaked, clutching the letter closer, before taking a deep breath. A knife appeared by his side, and he grabbed it, ignoring Amiya and Gilgamesh's shocked expressions, using it to open the letter. He put the knife down, from where it immediately vanished, and pulled out the letter's contents, a single sheet of paper, folded in half, and a small disc, that immediately emitted a glowing hologram of a familiar face. Young Midoriya. I am here, to deliver your exam results. Both Izuku and Inko giggled at All Might's line, before settling in to listen. The servants huddled closer to their master. Your written exam was perfect. I do believe that, in the history of UA as an institution, only a handful of people managed to score that highly, and this year we had 3 people scoring this well, with only one of them being a recommended student. As for the practical part, the hologram changed from All Might's face to a compilation of Izuku's actions during the entrance exam, including the infamous zero-pointer moment, that he'd been scolded for to no end. Your actions during the fight were excellent, and you showed great instincts by destroying the robots in a way that wouldn't put other examiners in harm's way. Furthermore, you did your best to minimize the harm that could come to them from other sources, and you're showing with the zero-pointer added to that. A moment of silence seemed to extend into infinity, before the hologram turned back to All Might's face. What school of heroics could ever turn away a candidate such as you? Congratulations Midoriya-kun, with the highest score of 180 points in the history of UA, you placed first in the practical. Welcome to your hero academia. The room erupted in loud cheers, and in more than a few tears. Izuku, drowned in tears and proud congratulations, barely heard All Might mention that he'd be their heroics teacher, as one last thing remained in his mind. In the scoreboard, he was first, with Ida and Uraraka immediately below him in second and third place respectively. But in fourth place, he saw Bakugo's name.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over, and if you enjoyed the video just leave a like, and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.